Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. Best damn morning show in the morning. That sounds a little weird, but whatever. I'll go with it. How are you guys doing? I hope you guys are doing all right. And yeah, I stand by that. The best damn morning show covering news, politics, opinion, that type of stuff. If that is what you are interested in, you are in the right place for this particular episode. There is fascinating news that is taking place. Trump backs down. Zelensky goes haywire, blows a gasket. And not just blows a gasket, he seems to be missing something that is very basic. Logic. It's a logic issue, right? If, in fact, don't take my word for it. Do you remember Arestovich? Arestovich used to be Zelensky's spin doctor. And Zelensky's spin doctor was being questioned. Listen to what he says here, because he's asked a very particular question about a deal. Now, you've had Rubio, you've had Trump, you've had Vance. All of them have effectively come out saying, look, if we don't get a deal, we're just going to walk. This is not aimed at Russia. It can't be aimed at Russia because, for the most part, Russia is continuously moving inexorably to the west, moving. Every word out of my mouth is a dead Ukrainian. It's that. And so if that is what you're presented with, NATO has shot his load. You have a president that doesn't seem to be all that interested and doesn't even like you all that much. And Europe can't do anything about it. So you are stuck in a losing position. It is a clear loss at this point. Even Trump is sitting there saying, you have no cards. Now, Rubio admitted it's a proxy war. If it is indeed a proxy war with all of NATO led by the United States, and the U.S. is saying, we're kind of tired of this. You had Hegseth go to Europe and say, you need to start taking care of your own defense. Okay. So what does that leave you as Zelensky? You've put in a deal that says you can't negotiate with the Russians. Okay. You can't negotiate with the Russians. Now he has reformed this, spun this into, well, I myself to negotiate with the Russians. Okay, dude, you put it in law. You were that animated about it. God damn it, I'm not going to negotiate. We're going to put it in the law. Fair enough, you've done that. Where does that leave you in this situation? Your military is collapsing. You have goons running through the street, thick-necked goons with beards running through the streets, snatching people and throwing them in vans in order to throw them onto the front lines. That's assuming they don't have enough money to effectively pay to get out. And yet, you are still going with this idea that we're not giving up territories. We're not doing this. We're not doing that. We're not doing this. Arestovich was in an interview. Listen to what he says here, because what he says, again, is a logic issue. Now, it's in Ukrainian, but you can read the subtitles.
Что мы должны отдавать? 4 области. По одной простой причине, потому что через полгода или год будете отдавать 6. Не хватит ума, 8 будете отдавать.
He said, why do we have to give up territories? Why do we have to do that? He said, because it is now 4. In 6 months, it will be 6. And if you play it stupid, it'll be 8. His point is, they're going to keep moving. And they're going to hold additional referendums. Hey, would you like to join the Russian Federation? Hey, would you like to join the Russian Federation? And at the point where those people say yes, Putin, the Russian, the Duma, are going to say, all right, we're going to pass a law. These are now part of the Russian Federation, and we will keep moving to the West. That's his point. Meaning, you can't do anything about it. You've lost the material capability of resisting and pushing back. A deal seems to be your only option. Now, I would say, as I've said before, the people who scream the loudest about, we believe in Ukraine, we're going to fight for Ukraine until the very end. Okay, you're fighting to the last dead Ukrainian, as if the last shot fired is going to win the war. No, it doesn't work that way. That guy's just dead. He's not winning the war with the last shot. He's just dead. And so you're stuck in the position of negotiate, even if you have to lose something, negotiate, or lose it all. The dirty secret is that your allies, the people who are standing beside you, arm in arm, the Europeans, they seem to accept, A, that you've lost, and B, that the Russians may take it all. And I can't see another situation around it where, in their minds, we can bog them down into a guerrilla war. What else is there? Are you going to put in troops to fight for the Ukrainians? Are you really going to do that? Are your populations going to be okay with you doing that, fighting the Russians, nuclear powers, going at it? And if they're not going to be okay with you doing that, then what are you doing? What is your advocacy for them to just keep going until they collapse? Meaning, there seems to be a fair bit of delusion, either in the context of Zelensky or in the context for the Europeans, or both. And in this situation, they seem to be egging each other on to keep going, with America saying, we're not that into you. This is not what we want to be in. We want to go after China. That's what we want to go after. And we've been bogged down into this. Now, initially in the very beginning, if you remember, Trump was like, I'm going to say this to the Russians. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. Now his position is, we're just going to leave. We're going to call it a day. We're not staying here. We're sick of this. If you don't sign on, which seems to be aimed more so at Zelensky. It is fascinating. I'm going to show you some of the clips where Zelensky is just melting down. I'll do that at the 8 o'clock hour because we have an open spot where we can have the conversation. Trump, on the other side of it, has given a press conference. It is a fascinating press conference. Fascinating press conference. He points out, we're going to bring the tariffs down on China. Now, I have been looking for this meeting. On social media, they're saying that there's a meeting that's supposed to take place between Xi Jinping and Trump in May. I have not seen that. I have not been able to confirm that story, that report at all. And yet, it's out there. But Trump is like, yeah, we can't keep the 145%, and we're going to make a great deal. And if they don't make a great deal, then we're going to set the table. Dude, Xi Jinping is not having panicky press conferences talking about removing sanctions or any of the other sanctions that they've basically applied to America in this case. They're not doing that. You are. You're doing that. You created this trade war. On top of that, I have no plans on firing Powell. No, because you don't have the power to fire Powell. But the fact that a couple of days before, if I tell him to leave, he'll leave. Into, well, I don't have any plans on firing Powell. Okay, those are radically different points of view and positions. What happened? What happened was reality asserted itself. This is the dirty truth that Trump is not going to say. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told a closed-door investor summit on Tuesday that the tariff standoff with China is unsustainable and that he expects the situation to de-escalate. He added that negotiations haven't started, but that a deal is possible, according to people who attended the session. Blah, 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 blah. We can't keep doing this. We can't keep this up. This is damaging us. Our markets are collapsing. Our dollar is collapsing. People aren't buying our treasuries. They're being sold. We can't keep this up. Prices are going up. This is not good. We've lost trillions off the market because of what I've done. So instead of saying that, I would say, we're going to come to some kind of deal. We're going to talk. China is going to have to get in. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to deal with us and blah, 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 blah. That. The other story, Financial Times. Now, I'm going to show you two of these. What time is it? Okay, we have a little bit of time. I'm going to show you two of these because they're related to one another. Financial Times came out with a story that was a bombshell. In quotes. This. Vladimir Putin offers to halt the Ukraine invasion along front lines, for Financial Times reports. I would prefer they said Financial Times claims, but that's me. All right. That sounds a lot like freezing the conflict. And that sounds a lot like Putin has gone back on his red lines. The other story, RT. Only trust primary sources on Russian talks. A lot of fake news is being published on subject, even by respectable outlets. Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov has reported. I believe Peskov. If I have to choose who to believe on matters pertaining to Russia, I would believe the Russian press secretary every day of the week and twice on Sundays. And I don't mean that from the standpoint of, bizarre stuff like Russia is at a spacecraft going to Uranus. Press Secretary Peskov said, not that. I mean, if we're having physical matter reality negotiations, and in the context of those physical matter reality negotiations, a Western paper comes out with a story. Western papers have come out with all sorts of stories. Russia bombed its own pipeline. Russia's fighting with shovels. The morale of the Russian soldiers is diminished. Snake Island. What was the other one? I forget the name of the plane that apparently shot down like 30 Russian aircrafts in 2 minutes. All of these things were nonsense. Russia was running out of missiles. That was the big one, right? And you find out that the missile production for Russia is like 5 to 10 times more than all of NATO, including the US combined. It has diminished my trust in Western publications pertaining to Russia. That's my point. There's a lot of propaganda that comes out of Western publications. And because of that, I'm very hesitant to just believe it. In the case of Peskov, who is probably privy to the negotiations, privy to the conversations that have taken place, well, okay, I believe that. Now, if they come out later and say, Putin has decided to halt, okay, fair enough. And again, to be fair, he has pointed out, I am not going to halt and freeze the conflict unless you are willing to give concessions. No weapons to Ukraine during the freeze. No, what was the other one? No intelligence. Basically, we can't freeze a conflict and you arm Ukraine to the teeth again. That's a no. We've done Minsk 22. We've done the Istanbul thing. We're not doing that anymore. You've lied over and over and over again. Zelensky has broken every ceasefire he's been engaged in. No more. We don't believe you. No mas. Putin has said we're not freezing the conflict along these lines. Now, is there leeway in that? It's a fascinating question to me. Usually, when countries are negotiating, they take maximalist positions with the idea of whittling themselves to some ground that they're willing to accept. The thing is, from the Russian point of view, though, we have won. You don't get to dictate terms. Losers don't dictate terms. We don't freeze the conflict. We're not going to have a situation in Syria where this thing springs up again at an inconvenient moment, and you guys are able to do damage. So we've invested a huge amount of blood and treasure. The blood and treasure is going to be honored. Full stop. These are part of the Russian Federations. Now, the Ukrainian troops can leave this area, and we would have a conversation about stopping the conflict. That has been their position. But is there leeway in that? Is the question. Are they willing to say, if you're willing to do that stuff that we said, then fair enough. We'll stop. Now, Zelensky is melting down over this. And he is effectively, this. One of the things that came out from the Telegraph, and again, take it with a grain of salt, is Donald Trump's peace proposal. And Trump's peace proposal, at least I thought I had it up. Donald Trump's peace proposal boils down to various items, but, it's like the devil's always in the details, right? Damn it, where's that? I have to pull it up. But the Telegraph effectively gave all of these different items in the context of the peace proposal. We could remove all sanctions. Crimea will be acknowledged as Russian territory. On top of that, you've had, it didn't say anything about the 4 territories beyond Crimea. So there's that. I guess my point is they are detailing, here we are, items that Trump apparently released that they were willing to propose. Now, Zelensky gave an interview where in that interview, he was freaking out, effectively saying, we are not going to negotiate unless there's a ceasefire. Okay, well, dude, according to you passed a law saying you can't negotiate. We're not going to give up the Crimea. We're not going to acknowledge the Crimea. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. In which case, Vance or Rubio and Rubio and Wickoff decided we are not going to London to have these talks, and decided that at the last minute in response to Zelensky's obstinance. It's fascinating, right? You have a proxy that has gone rogue. And because that proxy has gone rogue, you are, let's say, in a shallow sense, looking at it, trying to end the war. I know some people will come to a different assessment, but let's say it is what it looks like. And your proxy, the people who you've had effectively fight that war, here we are, is effectively like, we're not doing that. We're not doing that right here. I'm coming to you in a moment. Give me 1 second. This, Trump's peace proposal. This is nothing about taking over the Zaporozhye power plant, by the way, which was something that was floated. And so, again, is it part of the plan? Is this the entirety of the plan? Who knows? Trump says he's going to release it. Ceasefire now, direct Ukraine-Russia talks. By the way, Putin has said he's open to talks under certain conditions. Kiev drops NATO ambitions. Crimea recognized as Russia. Ukraine signs mineral deal. I love that that's in there, right? You're going to pay us back. You're going to pay us back. In any deal, you're giving us money. You're giving us $100 billion. U.S. lifts all anti-Russian sanctions. Now, Ted Raw, I had already seen this morning because I was up early. Ted Raw sent me this at like 6:45. His point being, hey, you see it says lift all Russian sanctions, right? So me going on a rant about Sputnik, this kind of emotional rant about Sputnik is dead. His point is, you don't really know that. And he's right. I'm a person. I can get things wrong. U.S. energy cooperation. And this is the Wickoff stuff, where Wickoff is like this kind of emancipatory deal that Wickoff was talking about, Sean Hannity. It's interesting. We will see. This is a wait and see, right? Let's see how it is. I want to go to my guest. He has written a fantastic article, and I want to get to that article. Klarenberg, welcome to the show, my man. Journalist, author. You have written a fantastic piece, and I'm going to show the audience that piece. Let me pull it up. I put it on my own site to pull up. I went through it this morning when I had the opportunity, and I agree with you. And by the way, not just agree with you. The first time where Donald Trump was the guy tried to whack Trump, tried to effectively assassinate Trump. My thought was, how did he get into the country? He clearly had ties to Ukraine in some way that were not being elucidated, explored. They didn't seem to care about it. And they fully ignored it. It was weird. Okay, I need to pull that article up. For whatever reason, it didn't translate, but I will pull it up. Go into it for me. You make the argument. Here we are. Did Ukraine, I'll just pull it up for you so people can see it for themselves. Did Ukraine intel attempt a Trump assassination? And you are talking about Nikita Kaspa. This was the teenager that murdered his parents, like just a shocking murder. And in the news, it was like he wanted to murder Trump. But the news portrayed this as kind of like, okay, this kid is deranged in some way, because of course, this random kid is not going to assassinate the president. And your point is, yeah, that's one way to look at it. But you guys didn't really look at the affidavits and look at what he has been saying, especially in the conversations he's been having on Telegram. You just kind of blew that off, that he had Ukrainian contacts. He was contacting a Russian number, Ukrainian number. And in communications on Telegram, saying some pretty explosive things about how he was going to go about doing it, using drones and whatnot, being directed to kill his parents. This was a fascinating read. And considering what Trump is doing now, it's really shocking that a country that has been embroiled in a war, losing that war, especially after being goosed on by the U.S., would try to find somebody to do something like that. Go into this for us, because this was a really good piece. And I'm going to put this at the bottom of the video so people can see it. Global
Yeah,
JTMS, by the way, is the website.
thank you very much for your kind words, Jamal. Yeah, I mean, I think that the key thing that really that kind of got me into this, I think, was the fact that the media was completely obsessed with this for weeks. I believe that he was arrested at the end of March, and for until Easter, like pretty much every day there was coverage of this. This included extensive investigative timelines of how the police found his parents dead, how they tracked him down and caught him, psychological profiles speculating on why he may have sought to assassinate the president, his political views, his mental state, all sorts of fear mongering about how, well, if Trump keeps these federal funding cuts up, he could put himself in further danger of more assassination plots, etc. And then, absent from all of this, and I would challenge your viewers to find a single mainstream article that mentions in any detail or even mentions at all the fact that he wasn't this insane neo-Nazi lone wolf, as he is widely portrayed, but he was clearly being directed in what he was doing by individuals unknown on Telegram, often speaking in Cyrillic text with Ukrainian telephone numbers. And it must also be noted that his method for attempting to, as you mentioned, to kill Trump was to try and use a drone equipped with explosives or poison. This is Ukraine's weapon of choice in the war with Russia. They have innovated in the field to a significant extent and changed the face of modern warfare forever in the process. Now, to the extent that his foreign contacts were mentioned at all, there was a lot of focus on the fact that, one of the people he was speaking to spoke Russian, or that he boasted to his classmate, or at least one classmate of his, that he was in contact with people in Russia and was plotting to kill the president. Now, what's not noted and is laid out very clearly in the affidavit is he not only expected to be extracted to Kiev after successfully taking out Trump, and asked numerous questions about, well, will I be able to live a normal life there? Will I be able to get a job, etc.? Which does tend to suggest that he wasn't just in contact with some random Ukrainian citizens. He was in contact with people with state connections or operating at some kind of state level. Given a new identity perhaps or whatnot. But also he asked specifically one of his confederates, or you might even call them handlers, what country do you think will get blamed for this? And they responded, Russia will be blamed for it. This is the goal. Now, when you bear in mind that his contacts with these people seem to have started around the time that Trump won the election in November last year, and continue, and there was fevered speculation that Trump was going to make good on his pledge to end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of taking office, which has been, rather forgotten. The linkages are so clear and they're writ so large that only by deliberately ignoring them, there's clearly been a concerted decision made to simply not mention this. Now, if you were to say, compare what happened when Ryan Ruth, he was another would-be Trump assassin, who he sought to join the Ukrainian armed forces. He sought to recruit foreign fighters for the effort. He took photos of himself in DC and Kiev, saying that he was, trying to rescue Ukraine, etc. The media acknowledged this, but they were really keen to play these connections down and say that he was just this delusional wannabe. He was too old to fight. He wasn't able to rustle up any support for Ukraine. He couldn't recruit anyone. Blah blah blah. They're not even trying to downplay. The media is not even trying to downplay links these times. They're just not mentioning them. Which is, really it's sinister, and I do think that it speaks to some degree of coordination. Now, I might add as well that it's been rather forgotten now, but in May 2024, you have the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico, who was elected on a very popular platform of ending his country's support for the proxy war, ending all financial and military aid to Kiev, and ending Russian sanctions. These are positions that were held by the overwhelming majority of Slovak citizens. And I might add that polls show that Slovakians overwhelmingly blame the US and NATO for the war, not Russia. And he was shot but at a public appearance. Got gut shot repeatedly. It's a miracle that he's still alive. And his would-be assassin was a Ukrainian ultra who explicitly has stated that his motivation was the Fico's quote-unquote pro-Russia, anti-Ukraine stance. Right. Now, questions abound as to whether his shooter had international connections. This was something that Slovakian police were apparently very interested in, not least because the shooter's Facebook profile was deleted 2 hours after the shooting while he was in custody. So, whether he was in touch with people in Ukraine, and if so, who they were, remain kind of open questions now. But quite clearly, as support for ending this nightmare in Ukraine is gaining ground, and there are indications from US officials that they just want done with this. I mean, it stands to reason that there are going to be people in Ukraine, and I've been warning about this for a very long time, who will have an axe to grind with the West. Now, for the time being, this seems to have translated into attempted or plotted assassinations against anti-war leaders. I think that once the conflict's over, this could translate into mass casualty attacks on average citizens of Western countries who are perceived by Ukrainians as having betrayed them.
Yeah. Well, I want to read a piece that you pointed out, and it says, let me share it, because you're right, it's damning. How do you ignore this? And even the Dylan Roof thing, it's like, how did he get into the country with the links that he had to Ukraine, and they just kind of ignored the links that he had to Ukraine? Right here, how long would I need to hide before I would be moved to Ukraine? He inquired, adding, I probably should brush up on Russian. He further asked, so while in Ukraine, I'll be able to get a normal job, have a normal life, even if when it is found out. I did it. In an event, more revealing exchange in January, Kaspa asked an, quote, unknown Confederate, what country do you think will get blamed for this? They stated. He's having these conversations with a Ukrainian phone number. And the FBI is like, coincidence, not important, not a factor. The media is like, no big deal. And to your point, the president is literally in the process of ending the war, deriding Zelensky as we speak. Like Marco Rubio and Witkoff have blown off the trip to London as a direct result of Zelensky effectively saying, I'm not making any of these agreements that you guys are coming up with. I wasn't discussed. Then he's freaking out, effectively pissed off. And you can imagine that there's a lot of, there are neo-Nazis in Ukraine. I mean, I think they're called Banderites, but whatever, fascists, right? These people have been killing and dying for 3 years. Do we really think it's shocking that one of them, more than one, would try to take the life of somebody who is trying to end that war? And that they may consider the fact that they're ending it a complete betrayal, especially if they come to the conclusion that they were led into it by the US. Like I want to show you something. One of the interesting things that came out was they are really hitting this hammer that Ukraine is not going to be part of NATO. Ukraine is not going to be part of NATO. Listen to, I believe this is Kellogg. Listen to what he says here. And I want to show something else because these two things are related. He comes out and says this. Like he's nailing it down. And he has to nail it down because he's trying to get a deal. And if Russia even believes that there's going to be a whiff of NATO later on, no deal. Listen to what he says.
Let me give you one example. NATO's off the table. You're not going to be part of NATO. That's something that's not new. We've been talking about that since 2008 when Ambassador Burns told Condoleezza Rice this was a good law. I wrote about it in 2013. But there's workarounds. There's workarounds you could do and workarounds you can work. So you don't want to start with a problem, throw it out there, and there's no solution to it. Let me give you one.
Okay, so he said, well, I said this in 2008. Okay, the problem with that is the Bucharest Summit. Bucharest Summit in 2008. This is NATO's website. NATO welcomes Ukraine and Georgia's Euro alliance aspirations for membership in NATO. We agreed today that these countries will be part of members of NATO. Both nations have the valuable contributions to the alliance operations. Well, yeah, they're on the border of Russia. No wonder. We welcome the democratic reforms in Ukraine and Georgia and look forward to free and fair parliamentary elections in Georgia in May. This is the next step for Ukraine and Georgia on their direct way to membership. Today, we make clear that we support these countries' applications to MAP. Therefore, we will now begin a period of intensive engagement with both a high political level to address the questions still outstanding pertaining to their MAP applications. We have asked the foreign ministers, blah, blah, blah. Effectively, the notion of you guys being in NATO, that is fantastic. We're welcoming you into NATO. And you get the Burns memo pointing out, dude, you're going to create a civil war. Kellogg is like, oh no, this wasn't the case. You know, we said this was a bridge too far. NATO didn't say it was a bridge too far. NATO is effectively offering these guys membership. If you are a neo-Nazi in Ukraine, you are a radical in Ukraine, or just far-right person, and you know that, meaning you know you were offered membership. You know you were pushed with this idea of membership, as if you go in this particular direction, NATO is somehow going to get involved either de facto or that they're going to bring you in. And you hear you're never going to be part of NATO. We're pulling out. We're done. You heard Joe Biden for 3 years. We're with you for as long as it takes. And now all of a sudden, as long as it takes has come. What is in your mind in that moment? Is that a betrayal? I would say yes. They may say yes. And what do you do when you've been, you might have lost 800,000 people in that situation, being pushed into this direction with the U.S. basically abandoning you? I guess my point is I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying that is not an irrational take. That is a rational take. Is it a rational act to try to kill a president to keep the war going, or just out of anger? That's the question, right? The FBI should have looked into it, though. And I agree with you. It is weird, bizarre that they did not. They dropped the angle. And by the way, the media didn't cover this angle either. What is
I think that on the subject of the media ignoring inconvenient facts as well. I mean, contained in the FBI affidavit are excerpts from Nikita Kassab's manifesto, which is it's called "Hail the White Race, Hail Hitler." really charming guy, it makes repeated references to Atomwaffen. They broke up, but it was this neo-Nazi terror group based in the US. And he states there is much to learn from the success and mistakes of Atomwaffen, and he directs people to their teachings on the use of violence to achieve political ends. Now, this is another kind of tangential but also significant link to Ukraine, because Atomwaffen had an intimate relationship with Azov Battalion, which is this openly neo-Nazi Ukrainian military regiment, which has received Western funding and training and weaponry. I might add, from Trump was the president who lifted restrictions on the supply of lethal aid to groups like Azov in Ukraine. Now, Atomwaffen, its founder is an individual called John Cameron Denton, who's basically spent most of his adult life in and out of prison for a variety of absolutely heinous crimes. His most recent indictment was in February 2023 when he was found to have been plotting to destroy electoral substations in the city of Baltimore, Maryland, which is a majority black city, of course. And his objective was to deprive citizens of heat and light during winter, which is often very harsh there. So the misery and death that would have been caused by this would have been substantial. Now, this occurred at a time when the Biden administration was routinely warning of the grave threat of racially or ethnically motivated domestic terrorism in the US, and it published a dedicated national security strategy to address the challenge. And then yet the indictment for precisely such a racially or ethnically motivated terrorist attack, it got virtually no news coverage. US officials had nothing to say about it. And you do have to wonder whether that's because of Atomwaffen's relationship with Azov. Because as we've seen, since the proxy war erupted, the media that previously did discuss with some degree of honesty the fact that Azov was openly neo-Nazi and founded by an individual who wanted to preserve the white race and saw it as the battalion's core objective. Azov hosted members of Atomwaffen in Kiev. They attended Azov events, including this neo-Nazi black metal festival, which is annually held in a state-owned venue. So again, you have to ask yourself, was this not picked up upon because of that relationship, and whether it would raise very serious questions about precisely who and what the US and other Western countries, in particular Britain, have been supporting in Ukraine since the Maidan coup in 2014. Yes, Azov has explicitly sought to foment, maybe that's the wrong word, but construct relationships with other groups overseas. There was in November 2022, there was an Italian neo-Nazi cell that was busted for planning to carry out mass casualty attacks. I believe it was in Naples, and then among their number were people who had fought in Ukraine. There was a British Parliament has something called the Security and Intelligence Committee, which is supposedly meant to vet the work and activities of MI5 and MI6, which are Britain's domestic and foreign spying agencies. And then in 2022, it published a report stating that there was an extremely high risk of British mercenaries who had returned from country redacted engaging in right-wing terrorism, and that their experience fighting in country redacted might have further radicalized them, made them more prone to violence, and meant they will have developed connections with others who share their ideology. I wonder what country redacted was, and I might add as well that the committee report adds that currently there is no formal process for monitoring these individuals once they return from Ukraine. And there has been no acknowledgement in the media of this potential problem since then. In the lead up to 9/11, which was carried out by veterans of US proxy wars in the former Yugoslavia, there were people within the US intelligence community who were saying every warning light is blinking red for a major terrorist attack on US soil. The same is true now, but there is a deathly silence on this as the war kind of seemingly grinds to a conclusion. Today we've just heard that Rubio and Witkoff have pulled out of a meeting in London, and Witkoff is, which was meant to be about discussing a ceasefire or peace plan for Ukraine, and that Witkoff will still be heading to Russia, which is, a clear indication that from the US's perspective, this is over. European powers seemingly maintain delusions of keeping this going, but they lack the muscle and the wealth and the ammunition to do this without US assistance.
No, you're absolutely right. I guess my thing is, we've had guests on the show that pointed out that at the end of this war, that there are going to be a lot of radicalized people, a lot of soldiers that think they were betrayed, and they're in Europe, right? I mean, we've ignored it for so long because from our point of view, you're fighting the Russians. We have no issue with that. That's what we want. We want you to fight the Russians. We want you to have that war. What happens when the war ends? Then what? You're in, I think you're in the UK. Has there been any provisions that you're aware of in Europe at all that has paid attention to this at all? Like, I know you said that for the most part, we've kind of just ignored this. And I know, like you said, some people are pointing out, hey, dude, this is going to be an issue. But governments haven't accommodated this. They've just kind of, because I can tell you in the US, they was like, there are no Nazis in Ukraine. And mind you, this is after months of stories, flag burning ceremonies, Democrats sending letters saying, hey, this is an issue. Americans are going over to get training by Azov battalion and coming back radicalized. And then when the war started, there are no Nazis in Ukraine. Zelensky's Jewish. We have no idea what you guys are talking about. Did Europe take the same tact with that, where they just completely ignored that issue entirely? And governments right now are ignoring. I guess the answer is yes. I guess this is a big question. The answer has to be yes, right? They're fighting a war, and Europe doesn't accept the US position on the war. Oh, that is going to be a tragedy per se. Wow.
Lots to look forward to, I think. I think that I mentioned the proxy wars in the former Yugoslavia. I think that's very much worthy of consideration and examination, in this context, because I have frequently called attention to the fact that the war in Bosnia, which was just one of the proxy conflicts in the region, the CIA and MI6, they via rat lines inserted a lot of mujahideen fighters into the country to assist their Bosniak Slavic Muslim proxies. And when the US encouraged the Bosnian leadership to reject every peace deal put in front of them and to take a completely intransigent approach in peace negotiations and not make any concessions. And then in 1995, late 1995, when the US got bored of this and they decided they wanted it over, they turned around and they foisted a very, very inequitable peace on Bosnia and said, well, if you don't, you have to accept this, and if you don't, then we're going to pull all support for you and leave you at the mercy of your enemies. That created a lot of bitterness locally. But under the terms of that agreement, the Mujahideen had to leave, and they were sent scattering. Some of their leadership were assassinated by forces unknown within the country, probably at CIA and MI6 direction. Now, their leadership, which included Osama bin Laden, were extremely angry about this, and it led to bin Laden's jihad on America, which, as I mentioned, one way or another led to 9/11. The same mistakes are being, if you even call them mistakes, are being repeated over and over and over again without any consideration for the consequences. I think in the US, you are somewhat insulated from this by the vast oceans surrounding you. But in Europe, I think this is going to be a real problem. And you even had Zelensky in an interview with the Economist, I believe it was in 2023, where he as good as made this threat openly when he said, there's a lot of Ukrainian refugees across Europe, and so far they've been well behaved. But if you were to turn your back on us, that might change. They have created, as has happened so many times in the past, the Western countries have created a monster which they are now incapable of reining in, and is willing to go off script, as it were, and disobey orders. I mean, that was the New York Times recently published an expose on the extent of American support for the war in Ukraine, much of which will be no surprise to anyone who has actually been following this at all seriously, i.e. ignoring the mainstream media reporting on the proxy war. It explicitly stated that the New York Times explicitly stated over and again that there were several examples of the Ukrainians doing things they had been told not to do or warned not to do. The idea that if you cut support, that's going to do anything apart from encourage them to do more things that you don't want them to do. And I do wonder whether there is an element in Europe, I mentioned Europe, this insane European determination to keep this irretrievably unwinnable quagmire going, that they worry about that on some level, even if they're not mentioning it publicly, they worry about the blowback from this. There have been numerous completely insane plans mooted for keeping this going. There was a few weeks back a plan called Sky Shield was floated, which would see Western fighter jets sent to police the skies of Ukraine and shoot down Russian missiles. But it wouldn't be a NATO deployment; it would be European countries doing this independently. This is despite the fact that Russia has clearly said on many occasions that this would make European countries formal belligerents in the war. There was talk recently, again, all roads lead to London, by British officials of sending an unconventional peacekeeping force that wouldn't actually be there to enforce a peace. It would be there to fight formally alongside the Ukrainians and prevent further Russian advances. This is madness, not only from the perspective of just escalation and this risking becoming all-out hot war between NATO and Russia, but also the countries proposing this, they don't have for the most part have militaries worth speaking of
to do it.
Britain has 70,000 soldiers in its military. It can't meet recruitment numbers. If you look at the ratio of casualties on the front line in Donbass, I think there was recently a casualty exchange where Ukraine gave Russia 40 slain Russian soldiers in return for 920 killed Ukrainian soldiers. And if you think that's excuse me, that was just one casualty exchange. Europe is comprised of militaries that would last, if in the event of a all-out shooting war with Russia, it'd last a few weeks.
Yeah. Can you explain that to me? Joe Biden was insane on this issue. And when Trump came in, he was like, look, we're done. We're sick of this. We don't want to deal with this. And for the longest time, the belief was that America was in the driver's seat, that America was the one that was driving this, especially with Joe Biden behind the bus. And when America pulled out, Europe, who often is considered to be, I don't want to say lapdogs, but kind of lapdogs of America in regards to that foreign policy, they wanted to keep going. They didn't want to stop. As you pointed out, they were trying all of these ideas. Oh, we're going to put our militaries in. We're going to fly jets. And maybe this was a bit of bluster in order to kill any kind of deal that Trump was ever going to come up with. Because after all, if you're doing that, Russia's not going to accept the deal under those terms. Why this level of vigilance by Europe? on this front? Like, is it that they've just internalized the narratives that they've ran with? Is it just they actually are terrified of the Russians in this way? Like, I can't wrap my head around what is going on in the European leadership that they're so adamant about keeping this going. And I'm of mind to believe that what they want is a guerrilla war. Like, they're of mind that Ukraine is lost. Russia's forced Russia to take it all. And in the manpower that they're going to have to expend to take it all, or at the very least collapse the Ukrainian military, they're going to have to deal with a West Ukraine that is rabid, in which case they can support a guerrilla war. Otherwise, I don't know what they're doing. It just seems like complete delusion to me. Can you, on some level, explain this to me?
Yeah, well, on top of, I think, yes, fears of well-founded fears of blowback if they draw back from this, which is just preventing them from taking the L in Ukraine. I think that there's also that there is enduring delusions about Europe's power. So I wrote another piece for my website, shameless plug, sorry about that. Called NATO is Dead. Now, this was a quote from an individual tied to, there's an elite British defence think tank, Chatham House, which is basically funded by the British government and is an elite talking shop for military and intelligence apparatchiks. He gave an interview in March to Bloomberg where he said, well, look, it's clear that NATO is dead. We can't rely on the Americans. We need to focus on our own defense. We need to beef up our own security, our own militaries, we need to start acting as independent military powers. Now, despite the fact that he stated we can't depend on the Americans anymore, within minutes of making all this bold proclamation that NATO is dead, he then said, oh, well, actually, we do have to depend on the Americans for weapons because we don't have the industrial capacity or the resources to make our own. Right. So he, Chatham House apparatchik, he suggested, well, we're a lot richer than Russia. So, we can pool our cash together and just buy all the weapons we need from the Americans. Now, there are two major problems with this view. And I've seen a lot of people make this point that Russia's GDP is tiny compared to Italy, say. The point is that, Russia has all the natural resources one could possibly want under its soil. It has extensive industrial capacity to the point that it can make millions of shells, artillery shells, annually. Germany struggles to make 100,000 a year, in no small part because it's deindustrialized itself by sanctioning its supply of Russian energy, which was key to its economy. There's that aspect to it, but it also, GDP on paper is basically just now an irrelevant metric because Europe's economies are based on services, stuff like advertising, marketing, PR, management, consulting. You can print money, but you can't print soldiers and bullets and tanks. And this is still somewhat lost on European leaders. But moreover, I think that one of the reasons that the Trump administration is so keen to get out of this, it's not because of any particular liking for peace or an aversion to overseas conflict. It's because the US can't keep this going any longer. Now, there was a little notice report in July 2024 from RAND, which is this Pentagon-funded think tank, right, and is very influential. It concluded that America's stockpiles of key ammunition, military vehicles, and weaponry are already kind of bottom of the barrel levels, and America's defense industrial base has been hollowed out via offshoring and outsourcing to such an extent that it cannot at any pace or scale replenish what's already been sent to Ukraine. And it can't even ensure that it can't even meet its own equipment, technology, and munition needs, let alone any of its allies. So if Europe's big grand genius plan is to buy is to just print a ton of money to buy American weaponry. Well, there might not be that much to purchase in the first place.
Yeah.
So I mean, and I do think that yes, that that for a very long time, and we've just like, I mean, also today, I believe, like Politico published this this article on called "The U.S. Cavalry Isn't Coming," and it effectively along the way it notes that that Europe doesn't actually have very much in the way of independent military capabilities whatsoever. Like it doesn't, all of its equipment is is supplied anyway. And it is dependent on the US to service, repair, and maintain what weapons it does have. Now, I mean, if the US could very easily, and I don't think this is outside the realms of possibility, choose to pull the rug out from that. I mean, Trump is continuing, just as he did in his first term, to make a lot of noise about how that Europe needs to fund its own defense and needs to increase its defense spending significantly. They don't have the capabilities, and I think that there has been an assumption for a very long time that the US will always just be there to protect us and arm us, so we don't have to think about that. And it's only now, 3 years, more than 3 years into this nightmare, that they're getting to grips with this reality. But even then, delusion endures somehow.
Wow. Kit, fantastic article, man. Fantastic article. I think you're right. I think what you call it, sinister, definitely intentional, where they seem to be leaving this out. I don't know if it's night blindness. I don't know if it's we're with Ukraine for as long as it takes, so we ignore excesses like, trying to whack the president. I don't know what it is, but they seem to have completely ignored this angle twice in regards to somebody who's tried to take the life of Trump, or at the very least wanted to take the life of Trump. Kit Klarenberg, check him out. Investigative journalist documenting the role of intelligence services in shaping politics and perceptions. And Kit, what outlets? You're with Grey Zone UK and you're with Global Dissidents. Global Dissidents is your site. This is the one that the article is published on, correct?
Yeah, Global Delinquents. That's my website. But you can also find my writing at the Cradle and Mint Press and Al Mayadeen too. So see you there. Thanks for having me on.
Oh man, anytime you want. Thanks, man. Really good article. Thank you. Have a good one, man.
God bless you.
I did not mean to cut him off early. I am sorry. Yeah, good article. I mean, if you remember the first guy that was trying to whack Trump, there was a question of how did this guy get into the country? Well, he was from Ukraine, so they effectively just let him in. It's just weird. And then at the point where he's caught, it's obvious what he was trying to do. All of those links were just dropped as an angle. It's like, so a candidate is running. There's been a war that's been going on for like 3 years. This candidate says he wants to end the war. A guy who gets in, who has connections to the country that's fighting that war, tries to whack that guy. And they're like, nothing to see here. And his point is, you have direct links to Ukrainians. I'm going to put the article at the bottom when I get the opportunity. Good article. Yeah, it's just, Kit is often fantastic when he writes the stuff, and that continues even now. And there's plenty of articles that he's written on global delinquents. Definitely check him out. I want to move, because we have time. I want to move to Trump. Now, I showed the Kellogg thing. I showed it prematurely, but NATO offered membership to Ukraine, 2008. Ukraine and Georgia. You both are welcome to join. We'd love to have you. The world is great. When they wrote that, William Burns, I've shown this many times before, wrote the memo, "Yet" means "niet." And Burns pointed out again, either Burns is a psychic, he does remote viewing, he's into some kind of mystical stuff where he's communicating with the universe, or It is obvious that this is a red line. NATO didn't seem to think so. And for whatever particular reason, they believe we can push up to the Russian border and we can militarize the border. No issue. And for whatever reason, Russia is not going to take issue with this. Ukraine and Georgia's NATO aspirations not only touch a raw nerve in Russia, they engender serious concerns about the consequences for stability in the region. Can I make this larger? Yeah, good. Stability in the region. Not only does Russia perceive encirclement, okay, it's not their perception. You are literally trying to edge up on around the borders. Encirclement, but efforts to undermine Russia's influence in the region. But it also fears unpredictable, uncontrolled consequences which would affect Russian security interests. Experts tell us that Russia is particularly worried that with strong divisions in Ukraine over NATO membership, with much of the ethnic Russian community against it, could lead into a major split involving violence or, at worst, civil war, which is exactly what happened, a civil war, East versus West. You get the U.S. assisting, let's say, hardcore far right. You may call them Banderites, neo-Nazis, whatever you want to call them, goons, knocking up the government. You get elements in the East saying, we want out. We're not going to be run by these Nazis. They hate our guts. We're ethnic Russians. You get the West bombing the Donbass, killing, 14,000? I think it was a little bit more than that number. And the West acted and pretended as if ethnic Russian Ukrainians weren't Ukrainians. It was the weirdest thing in the world. They fully took this position that it's purely Russia making an issue out of this. It's not the killings and everything else. Now, Andre, when he was on the site, when he was on the show, made the point that it was the U.S. that was directing the bombing. So we were instrumental in the origin of this, the agitation for this, and the overthrow that they called a revolution of dignity, which was effectively a coup. All the way through. The notion that we are acting as if we are arbiters is nonsense. It's nonsense. We're directing a war while simultaneously pretending like we're being peacemakers in that process. I get it. Donald Trump is saying, well, this is Joe Biden's war. Okay, sure. The point that I'm trying to make here is that Kellogg insisting that, oh, the NATO thing was a red line.
Example is, we've been very clear. NATO's off the table. You're not going to be part of NATO. That's something that's not new. We've been talking about that since 2008 when Ambassador Burns told Condoleezza Rice this was a bridge too far. I wrote about it in 2013. But there's workarounds. There's workarounds you can do and workarounds you can work. So you don't want to start with a problem, throw it out there.
I don't know what those workarounds are. I don't know what those workarounds are. Maybe, I mean, you can come in with some negotiation tactic. Maybe. Fair enough. Maybe. Who knows? Now, Trump has put out, well, I'm not going to say Trump. I want to say the Telegraph has put out what they consider to be their peace plan. Zelensky is clearly melting down over this peace plan. So this is him, right here. All right, good. Sharing. All right, this is him in a meeting, and I'm going to show you Vance's response to this because they are not taking this well, meaning the White House. The White House is like, we gave a fair deal. You're not accepting the tenets of this deal. So we're not going to London to have a conversation about it. This is Zelensky's response to a lot of what he was saying in regards to the deal.
Україна відмовляється від НАТО, наприклад, всі нас підтримують НАТО, але Росія вимагає, щоб ми відмовилися від НАТО. У мене питання дуже пряме. У нас цього немає. Нас всі не підтримують. Але навіть якщо б ми уявили це, у мене питання, а відмовлялись від НАТО, це гарантії безпеки. А що буде Україна?
If Ukraine was neutral, this would never happen. That's the rub. If Ukraine was neutral, this would never happen. And as John Ballgame points out, they should have elections. Like, this goofball has decided he is king of Ukraine for the time being. He's king. He has effectively declared martial law and is going to stay in power, for another 3 months? when, if indeed there's an election, he would most likely lose. He knows it. When the war ends, he is out. He knows it. He is making this argument of, well, we need to be in NATO. If we give up NATO, what is Russia giving up? Nobody would have invaded you if you were neutral. That seems to be lost in this conversation. The moment that you decided you're lumping in with the West in an overthrow, in a coup, then Russia is like, okay, we cannot have a hostile military organization run by enemies on our border any more than the US would tolerate the same thing in Cuba or Mexico. Just pointing it out. Here's the next one. So he points out, we want a ceasefire before any negotiations, despite the fact that he kept blowing off ceasefires.
Якщо руські завтра не просто готові до припинення вогню.
Now, understand, the only reason he's calling for a ceasefire is because they are getting crushed on the battlefield. That's the only reason. We need time. We need time to rearm, to reload. We need to get weapons. We need to pull people into the military. We need to strengthen our positions during the ceasefire that he will most likely violate. So obviously, this is not going to be accepted either. I'm going to go to the next one. Russia's not going to stop. They've had mints 1 and 2. They kept going. There is another clip of Zelensky where he's talking about Crimea. And he's pointing out, look, we can't give up Crimea. Now, the problem with this is that acknowledgement of Crimea was one of the tenets in Trump's peace deal. We are going to acknowledge that Crimea is Russian territory. Now, this goes against U.S. policy for God knows how long. And so this is something that, this is a move, let's say, for the U.S. in this regard. Zelensky is saying, well, we can't do that. Now, at the point where he says that, J.D. Vance comes out. I believe he's in India. He was trying to get a trade deal in India. And he says, let me make sure you can see it. Sometimes I have this thing set up and nobody sees it. Yep, good. Nobody was going to see it. This is J.D. Vance. He's in India pointing out, dude, we put out a fair deal. What are you doing?
We've issued a very explicit proposal to both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it's time for them to either say yes or for the United States to walk away from this process. We've engaged in an extraordinary amount of diplomacy, of on-the-ground work. We've really tried to understand things from the perspective of both the Ukrainians and the Russians. What do Ukrainians care the most about? What do the Russians care the most about? And I think that we've put together a very fair proposal. We're going to see if the Europeans, the Russians, and the Ukrainians are ultimately able to get this thing over the finish line. Again, I feel pretty optimistic about it. I think everybody has been negotiating in good faith, but it's now time, I think, to take, if not the final step, one of the final steps, which is at a broad level, the parties saying, we're going to stop the killing, we're going to freeze the territorial lines at some level close to where they are today, and we're going to actually put in place the kind of long-term diplomatic settlement that hopefully will lead to long-term peace.
Yep. And if J.D. Vance says it, you better be careful. The man who murdered the Pope. The man who killed the Pope said it. If that's the case, you better take it to the bank. All right. So Zelensky's not handling this well, to put it mildly. He's not handling this well. And the White House is very annoyed with him not handling this well. And that threat of, we're going to walk, you take the deal or we're going to walk. Isn't that kind of what Kit Klarenberg is saying? Like, from Zelensky's point of view, you offered us NATO membership. Behind the scenes, you kept telling us we're not going to be in NATO. But verbally, you kept saying Russia doesn't get to decide who's going to be in NATO. Russia doesn't get to decide who's going to be in NATO. You're going to be in NATO one day. Joe Biden had a conversation with Zelensky saying, NATO is in your hands, bro. When the truth of it is that they understood that in order for Ukraine to be in NATO, they had to win the war. The war was the test of strength in order to decide whether Ukraine, and for that matter, NATO, was going to expand into Ukraine. That was the test. If you win it, Russia loses the ability to have a choice in the matter. But you lost it. And because you've lost it, the U.S., who has effectively been running you for the past several years, is now saying, we're done with this. We're finished playing with our toys. We're moving on to other toys. Maybe Taiwan, maybe the Philippines, but we're tired of this game. We're done. Europe, we're out. Handle a mess. They're leaving Europe with a mess. You have a Russian military like 1 million people, and yet they're like, all right, Europe, figure it out. Figure it out. We're done. That is fascinating. I don't know if Europe is even going to accept this. I don't even know if Russia is going to accept this. Now, there's an article that came out in Reuters that I pointed out once before, this. I am skeptical of this article until I get confirmation on the article. Vladimir Putin offers to halt Ukraine invasion along current front lines, Financial Times claims. Financial Times claims. Now, Putin is very diplomatic. And I think if Mark saw that, Mark will have some feelings about that article. And I think because Mark's point of view is we need to solve this. And it needs to be a clear, definitive loss. None of this stalemate stuff. None of this, negotiate. No, we need to win it. And we need to win it decisively. We need to inflict a strategic defeat on NATO, period. That's his point of view. But he also points out that Putin is more diplomatic. And if he can get what he wants in regards to a peace deal, he would take the peace deal. The problem is, how do you get what you want in the peace deal? How do you ensure that when Trump drops dead or when the next president comes in that may be a Democrat who still believes in the war, won't once again reconnect with the transatlantic relationship, won't build up forces in Ukraine? How do you do that? 10 years. What if it changes again? You have to raise another military. You have to get people in military uniforms and fight another war in this case? Meaning, is that what you really, if you're Russia, want to do? How do you ensure that NATO membership is fully off the table? Now, you could say, well, let's put it in the Ukrainian constitution that they're going to be neutral. It was already in the Ukrainian constitution that they were going to be neutral. They got rid of it. How do you ensure it? I don't have an answer for that. I don't have an answer for that, right? Just because a U.S. president is looking you in the face and says it, and that president is Trump, and he's gotten rid of pretty much every deal that he's come along with. How do you believe it? And I'll go further. This could all be gamesmanship. Meaning, if this is true, which again I'm skeptical on, that would mean that Putin is deciding to freeze the conflict, something that he said he wouldn't do. And let's say in 10 years, a U.S. president circles back around and decides to do this again when Putin is dead or something. I hope you get my point. How do you trust the U.S. in this situation who has war plans, gamesmanship plans of, okay, we lost this time, but maybe next time we'll be able to pull this off? How do you trust it? As I keep pointing out, there's a thread of logic that runs through U.S. policy in regards to primacy of the globe. Countries that resist that primacy are problematic. Syria, problematic. China, problematic. Iran, problematic. All of these countries are problematic from the U.S. standpoint. They block this notion of primacy of the globe. You may have lost this time, but you have only lost Ukrainians. And I'm saying that to be as crass as possible because that is the way we look at Ukrainians. Cannon fodder, toys that we're effectively playing with that we're now saying, all right, we're done. Figure it out. We're going to do something else. Think of how screwed up that is, just as a human being, to look at other human beings as disposable and purely as proxies to whatever cause you're trying to go with. What stops them from doing this again is my point. And I guess my point is nothing. What deal do you want to write up that we can't tear up? What agreement do you want to come to that we can't get rid of? How do you enshrine this? There is nothing cosmic that comes into play where God gets involved and says, this will be forever. Nothing at all. So if you freeze that conflict, you're freezing that conflict knowing full well and under this notion that it could happen again. It could happen again. Now, you can take the position, we have territory, we can create a buffer zone. We may have a military that we are keeping on ready. Like, you may be able to come up with some model that would allow you to justify it if you're the Russian side. What stopped troops from going into Ukraine from foreign sources? Is that going to be part of the deal? Would Europe accept that deal if the answer is no? I hope you get my point. The deal would seemingly have to be more complicated than what the Telegraph is effectively making it for the Russian side to accept that. Putin says no intelligence, no more weapons, no NATO, etc. And I would wager to you a change in government. Zelensky's out. I would wager that has to be part of the deal. From the Russian point of view, Zelensky is illegitimate. He didn't win an election. He's been declaring martial law for over a year. And so he is effectively a dictator. He's been locking up political opponents. He's been banning opposition parties, banning opposition media. So how do you deal with this guy who's effectively dictator of Ukraine at this point and sign a deal with him? And the next person who comes in says he's not legitimate and throws it away. I hope you get my point. Like, it would have to be more complicated than what the Telegraph is making it in regards to what Trump wants, which is why I am eager to see Trump put out his deal as opposed to it just being leaked in the Telegraph as bits and pieces. I also am doubtful of the Telegraph story, of that story, because of this. RT came out and pointed out, look, there's a lot of fake news that's coming out in the media. Don't believe it. Believe from reputable sources. And what he means by that is, if we say it, that's one thing. If you're hearing it in US media, that's something else. That is not necessarily to be believed. We've seen a lot of fake stuff. And this, as I pointed out before, if this is true, breaches a red line that Putin established. Now, maybe they can fashion this in their minds that, okay, we can stop here and we can legally say that these are the territories. But I will tell you, on some level, that may be betrayal to the people who voted to leave from those territories. How do you deal with that? These seem to be complicated negotiations, or at the very least you would think so. Also, the notion that Russia would stop when they are clearly continuously moving and seemingly in the middle of an offensive seems a bit weird. But who knows? At this point, I have not seen anything from the Russian side to talk about it one way or the other. Putin was in a meeting recently. I forget the country he was in. This, from my understanding, didn't come up. I didn't see anything on RT about it. I didn't see anything on Sputnik about it. I didn't see anything about it where Putin, Peskov, Lavrov, any of these people said anything about anything in that article or even responded to the notion of Trump's details. They've said, well, we appreciate the president for saying the Crimea is Russian territory. We appreciate so-and-so. Okay, that's political speak. That's a little bit different than, you would see articles, let's say in something like RT saying, we trust Trump. No, you don't. You don't. That's, that's political speak. We're trying to be nice. We're trying to sweeten, you get more flies with honey. That's different than we accept XYZ. We are willing to do XYZ. Putin has delineated what was necessary to end the conflict on more than one occasion. Is that a maximalist demand? Mark will probably say no, considering from their point of view, we've won the war. They're going to collapse if we keep going. I would also put to you that argument from Vance, Rubio, and Trump has less to do with Russia and more to do with Ukraine. You are going to collapse if we leave, and Europe can't do anything to change any of that. So you better accept our deal. Full stop. Get on board, or you're going to be left on your own. Is Zelensky going to bow down to this? He seems to be going rogue. I don't know. All of this stuff is fascinating. But the side that we really need to hear from hasn't said a word. In fact, two sides. Trump has not released this deal yet. Some of it's leaked. He hasn't released it. I want to see his. The Russians haven't said anything about it, short of, we appreciate this. We'll look at this. We'll, analyze this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But hasn't given a clear delineation on yay, nay, here are the changes that we need. Short of any immediate or fast deal is most likely to not happen. They have said that. And so if that is indeed their position, we're not rushing this. We have no need to rush this. If we keep going, they're going to collapse. We have no need to speed up on any of this. We're going to talk it through. You guys are untrustworthy, and we are going to have deliberate negotiations. Full stop. Now, Putin did point out he's open to having conversations with Zelensky, again, under certain contexts, but they can't because by law, Zelensky has outlawed those conversations. Or let's say with Ukraine, let's put it that way. So we're at an impasse. The Trump administration seems to want to get this done quickly. The Russians, less so, for obvious reasons. Zelensky feels like he's being screwed over. That's where we are in regards to the negotiations. It is fascinating. We'll see what comes up. It's fascinating. I just want to give an overview of what's taking place on that front. On another front, the trade war. So Donald Trump, where is it? Okay, yeah, I went over that. So Donald Trump had a press conference the other day. And in that press conference, he says the darndest things. So one of the darndest things that Donald Trump comes up with is this, which is funny as all hell. Keep in mind, Donald Trump got in and says, we're having a tariff war against the world. And in the same way that NATO, the US, all of these European vassals fully believe that they were going to beat the Russians because they're a gas station, Nigeria with snow, military budget of $80 or $80 billion, whatever that number is. I think it's 80 billion. They fully expected the world, which is an astonishing thing, right? 5% of the globe telling the rest of the world to kneel before America's power. And China not just took umbrage, seemed to be offended by the whole thing. And in what seems to be rage, it was like, we aren't doing any of that. We are going to war. We will drop. Like, this government will collapse before we agree to anything with you in this regard, meaning you're not the boss of us. And they escalated. And every day they seem to have escalated more and more and more. They got to like 125% tariffs. And then it's like, no beef. We don't want your airplanes. We don't want, Jesus Christ. It's like soybeans or something like that. Like, they went down a list of things that they just didn't necessarily want. They weren't going to take, and putting more and more and more pressure. Trump, who had these ludicrous numbers in regards to tariffs on all of these other countries, had to back down, had to go to 10% because effectively treasuries. People were selling them. People weren't buying them. And it freaked the financial system out. Stock market has been collapsing day after day after day. This includes, by the way, attacks on Powell, who he has been going after because Powell hasn't necessarily cut rates. But again, you are doing this. You are single-handedly screwing over Americans. You are depreciating the value of the dollar, which has dropped like 10%, which means that anything that you buy in the stores that are coming from a foreign source is going to be more expensive for you. The tariffs are going to make more things more expensive for you. And you have Republicans working up a tax cut to give the rich like $20 trillion, some obscene amount that they're going to put on the deficit. That's already $36 trillion. So you are under excessive pressure. Trump comes out and says this. I love this clip. It's like he's trying to spin a failure into gold.
Suggested that with tariff rates as high as they are now, it's effectively a marginal trade between the United States and China. Do you see it that way?
That's true. 145% is very high, and it won't be that high. It's not going to be that high. It got up to that. We were talking about fentanyl, where, various elements built it up to 145. No, it won't be anywhere near that high.
What level do you think it'll come down to if you have
It'll come down substantially, but it won't be zero. It used to be zero. We were just destroyed. China was taking us for a ride and just not going to have.
I'll tell you this. China is not making a panicky video. Xi Jinping is not making a panicky video where he's like, yeah, we're going to cut. Trump is making that video. Trump is making that clip. China's not de-escalating. They're calm as a cucumber. Their stock market isn't collapsing. They had a 4.5% clip in their last numbers. Like, so they seem to be perfectly fine. He's making this video. He's making this video. He's making this video. Yeah, we're gonna drop the numbers. We're gonna, it's not gonna be zero. They were taking us for a ride. And so, I had to go to 145%, et cetera, but we're gonna get those numbers. Now, there's reporting that there's supposed to be a conversation between Trump and Xi Jinping. I have not seen the conversation anywhere. I have not been able to corroborate that at all. There's something that Trump says here, though, that seems to imply that he believes he's going to have a conversation with Xi Jinping. Again, I have not seen that video. I have not seen that reporting. I put it that way. But this is him when they're asking him, like, hey, what are you going to say to this?
My relationship.
Wait, oh, this is this one. Where is it? Oh, where is it? Did I get rid of it? Damn it. I think I got rid of it. I'm going to find that video. Because Trump, in that clip, strongly insinuated that he was going to have a conversation with Xi Jinping. And they were effectively asking him, basically like, hey, what are you going to say to him? What are you going to, are you going to bring up COVID? Are you going to have a go at him? What are you going to say? And Trump, being more conciliatory, was like, no, we're going to have a good, decent meeting. Everything is going to be great. We're going to talk about trade and everything else. We're going to come to a great deal. And China, and it's going to be a golden century. Like, he's having this spin associated with it. But again, I have not been able to validate that there is any meeting that is supposed to take place between Trump and Xi Jinping. Maybe at some point, but China hasn't called. He's waiting for a phone call that is never going to come, because from their point of view, you've decided to have a trade war against the world, a trade war that we don't accept, and had been going around the world trying to get help, or let's say make alliances. The U.S. had been trying to make alliances with other countries with the idea of ganging up on China in order to kind of isolate them. China's come out effectively to say, if you do that, we will retaliate with you, against you. And not just retaliate. Okay, right here. Okay, here we are. All right, this is okay. I was looking for the one from DD Geopolitics, but I'll take this one. RT has the same video. Oh, here it is. I think this is it. All right, so this is Donald Trump talking about China.
We're going to be very good to China. I have a great relationship with President Xi, but they would make billions and billions and billions of dollars a year, and they would build.
Hegseth suggested that with the tariff rates as high as they are now, it's effectively an marginal trade between the United States and China. Do you see that?
That's true. 145% is very high, and it won't be that high. It's not going to be that high. It got up to there. We were talking about.
I'm sorry, that is not the video that I was looking for. Okay, I'll go with this one. DD Geopolitics had a longer version of this clip. That's why I was looking for, that very specific clip. I had it up at one point. I must have gotten rid of it. I'll go with RT's version. So this is Donald Trump talking about some conversation that is apparently going to take place with Xi Jinping.
Play hardball with them? Are you going to mention COVID?
Well, I'm not going to say, no, I'm not going to mention COVID. I'm not going to say, oh, I'm going to play hardball with China. I'm going to play hardball with you, President Xi. No. We're going to be very nice. They're going to be very nice.
Play hardball with them? Are you going to mention COVID?
Well, I'm not going to say, no, I'm not going to mention COVID. I'm not going to say, oh, I'm going to play hardball with China. I'm going to play hardball with you, President Xi. No. We're going to be very nice. They're going to be very nice. And we'll see what happens.
Play hardball with them? Are you going to mention COVID?
No, we're not going to play hardball. We're going to have a conversation. They're going to be polite. We're going to be polite. We're all going to be polite. And we're going to come to some kind of deal. They've been taking advantage of us. The point I'm trying to make here, though, is he backed down. He is lowering those tariffs. And to make this even clearer, this is Commerce Secretary. The reason that Trump is making that video or saying that right here. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told a closed-door investor summit Tuesday that tariff standoff with China is unsustainable, that he expects the situation to de-escalate. Bessent added that negotiations haven't started, but a deal is possible, according to people who attended the session at the event. They're trying to calm nerves. The stock market has been collapsing every day. 1,000 here, 900 here. Dollar dropping in value. Treasuries not being sold. China escalating day after day after day. Trump being in a trade war that he can't extricate himself from, that he himself got himself into. China trying to make deals with Europe. China trying to make deals with the global South. My point is, Trump can't do this on his own, in which case he's trying to get other countries to help. Those other countries, by the way, that he's been browbeating. So the transatlantic relationship that you could typically depend on, help you in this, they may not be there. And you have China reaching out to him, with Europe apparently going to China, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in May. So he's in a box of his own making. And being in that box of his own making has to de-escalate. He has to bring down the temperature. The market is freaked out. Investors are freaked out. There's another thing that Trump had to back down on. And this one is more funny than anything else. If you remember, Trump, I think it was a few days ago, came out and said this. He's been attacking Jerome Powell over and over and over again. He just wouldn't let up going after Jerome Powell. Oh, he's screwing up. He's not acting fast enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Jerome Powell can't come fast enough. So this is the first clip. I'm going to show you this clip first, and then there's another one immediately after this. This is not leadership. This is not steady and stable. This is something else. And the level of volatility that it creates is not something that is great for economic growth, or for that matter, even economic dependency. This, from a leader, looks bad.
Oh, he'll leave. If I ask him to, he'll be out of there. But I don't think he's doing the job. He's too late, always too late, a little slow, and I'm not happy with him. I let him know it, and if I want him out, he'll be out of there real fast, believe me.
If I want him out, he'd be out of there real fast. Fast forward. About 2 days later, about 2 days later, you get Trump taking questions at the White House. I believe this was yesterday, saying this.
Late's not good.
Mr. President,
I don't want to talk about that because I have no intention of firing him.
Mr. President, there are reports that you're considering doing something for moms across the country, giving them some kind of bonus whenever they have a child. Are you considering that?
Sounds like a good idea to me. Yeah.
You heard it in the beginning. He says, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to fire him. I don't want to get rid of him. A few days before, the Fed chair needs to go. He's not doing his job. He's not acting fast enough. He's screwing it up, and I've told him as much. 2 days later, I don't want to talk about that. I'm not firing him. You don't have the power to fire him. There's that. first of all. Two, the fact that 2 days before you were talking, basically browbeating the Fed chair because he's not doing what you want him to do. And then a couple of days later, you're like, yeah, I don't want to have that conversation. He's not going anywhere. So I don't want to talk about that. What is similar in these situations is that Trump picked fights that were zero sum. There was no win-win relationship in the fights that he was picking. You picked a tariff war with China, and you continuously escalated to some ludicrous number and had to back down from that number when the markets freaked out. You picked a fight with the Fed chair, by the way, after creating a trade war that you wanted him to bail you out of on some level. And after a few days where the markets is dropping 900 points, 1,000 points, 900 points, now you don't want to talk about it. Why? Because you were damaging the economic system of the United States in a very perceptible way. And in doing so, the ratings on the thing that you got elected on the economy, plummeted. What was it? Among independents, like 31, it was the largest drop or something like that. This is chaotic. This is chaotic. I forget who described him as if he has ADD. Can't focus. You're picking fights, and you're picking fights without a clear acknowledgement of the limits of your power as president. It's that. Whether it's, and the war in Ukraine, yeah, that wasn't Trump's fault, per se. I'm putting asterisks on that. I always put an asterisk on that because they're screaming at him that he's effectively working with the Russians. So he's doing stuff to try to prove he's not working with the Russians. But Joe Biden was all in. That's an American war. Limits of power in this case, unless you want to go to nuclear war. Trump comes in and decides to do something very similar in an economic sense. This time, not against Russia, because he passed no tariffs on Russia at all. His excuse was, look, they got a lot of sanctions on him. So no, I'm not going to pass tariffs. And I'm trying to get a deal. But he did it on everybody else, including China. And again, zero sum. There was no way out of that. You win or you lose. And in this case, he had to back down. Market pressure forced him to back down. China didn't do that. They didn't back down. There's no video of Xi Jinping saying anything like this. Again, I have no cooperation that Donald Trump has a meeting planned with Xi Jinping. Social media is saying that Reuters reported it to take place in May. I have not seen that from Reuters. I have checked the web. Maybe I missed it. It is possible. I'm a human being. I'm flawed. That is possible. But I haven't seen it. What it looks like, though, is a president who believed, similar to Joe Biden, that America could do anything. And that because he's the president, that he could do whatever he wants. And that the consequences of it seem to be minimized because we're America. And what he got back from the world as it responded to him was the need to back down, even against the Fed chair, to back down. This is a loss. Another one. Donald Trump has no wins under his belt. He's been in office, 100 days? I think today is like his 100th day. Failure across the board. I understand that MAGA may be great with the immigration thing. Yeah, kick that person out of the country. You should not be great with that. You should not be great with that. And the reason why you shouldn't be great with that is somewhat obvious. We're a country of laws. There's due process. There's due process for a reason. Regardless of who you are, you're an American. And as an American, you have certain rights that are inherent to you being an American. Now, you can say, well, some of these people were from other countries. I don't care. They still have due process because they're in this country. If you get rid of that, oh, God. Do you realize that part of the reason our body of laws is the way it is because of Europe? Like the notion where you have a king that can do whatever he wants. The notion that if the king decides he wants to get rid of you, he can get rid of you. And they're like, okay, we don't want that. We don't like that. We need to have due process of law, meaning whoever you are, whatever you've done, we could have watched you kill 20 people, and yet you will still go through a court case. I don't know if you remember this guy, was a black guy who killed all of these people on a train. Some people lived. He represented himself in court. They knew he did it. The people who survived could see him. It was you. Even on the stand, they pointed, it was you. You did it. You are the one that shot me. You are the one that did that. Even he had due process of law. That is a virtue. That is not a negative. The First Amendment is a virtue. It is not a negative. And the same way with the Brits were celebrating the NHS, we should be celebrating the First Amendment. I don't necessarily like the things that you're saying, but damn it, it's your right to say it. That's a virtue. The notion that you're kicking people out of the country because they're saying things that you don't like about a foreign government is outrageous. It is anti-American on its face. Whether Joe Biden is doing it, whether Donald Trump is doing it, it is anti-American. I'm pointing out that just because it's your president doesn't mean that it's a good thing that the person is doing, and it is a virtue to be able to say the president is full of shit, especially if he's doing shit like that, which Donald Trump is. He has no wins under his belt. You may give him credit for the immigration thing. I would wager to you Obama kicked more people out of the country than Trump, and I would wager to you that Obama would have kicked more people out of the country than Trump, even at the end of Donald Trump's term. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to be right on this. No wins. I'm going to end the war in 24 hours. No, he didn't. It was absurd. It was ludicrous to even think he would. Unless he was going to pull the Steve Bannon and say, I'm done, and just walk, which maybe he should have done. Maybe he should have done. As McGregor pointed out, this is Donald Trump's war now. I don't know if I will go that far, but it's getting there. You're still working with this country that is your proxy. You could always pull the plug. You're threatening to pull the plug, but you could pull the plug. He hasn't done that. Leave it to Europe. The trade war was just absurd. Whether it was to put up barriers in order to shield the United States from a potential conflict with China, whether it was to bend the other countries to the will of the United States to get trade agreements that was going to be in the best interest of America because he was punishing other countries, whether it's to bring business back in 10 years after Donald Trump might be dead in the ground. Who knows? Whatever the rationale for it, I'm not in his mind. But you are going to hurt a lot of Americans. Many of those policies are going to hurt a lot of Americans. None of these things have been a success. So, first 100 days, nothing under his belt. Don't take my word for it. Take a Trumpster. Take somebody who actually voted for Trump, who believes in Trump, who likes Donald Trump. My former co-host, Malik Abdul, who was on CNN, having this exact conversation. He is not being as brutal as I am, but he's effectively saying the same thing.
Normally presidents have one thing that they're able to do in their first year, because we go into the midterms, you're not going to get anything done then. For Barack Obama, it was Obamacare or the health care. For Donald Trump in his first term, it was in those first years, it was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Donald Trump this time around, and I do agree with Alyssa, Donald Trump, it really is a lot of unfinished business. He felt as if he was not allowed to have a second term. And Donald Trump is doing not just a lot of things, continuing what he did in the first term. It is those things that he always wanted to do, that many people in the Republican Party always wanted to do. And I don't think that the pace is going to lessen in any way. Donald Trump is going to keep barreling forward.
Phrase and all that's a lot of words. Key phrase, a lot of unfinished business. He got nothing done. He got nothing done. I love that clip. That's my man. I may disagree with him on a lot of this stuff. That's my man. I would defend him to the hilt. Unfinished business. If you want to call it that, fair enough. I call it nothing done. I call it nothing done. So there is that. There's that. It's just, here's another clip of Trump on this, where they're asking him, is he going to make a deal with China? Right here. This is Donald Trump saying he's going to play hardball. Okay.
So we want them.
Right here. And, if not going to make a deal, then we're going to set the policy.
We'll see what happens. But ultimately, they have to make a deal, because otherwise they're not going to be able to deal in the United States. So we want them involved, but they have to, and other countries have to make a deal. And if they don't make a deal, we'll set the deal. Because we're the ones that set the deal. Scott and Howard and myself and others, we're going to be setting the deal.
Well, Scott said, Scott is saying something else. Scott is saying this. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told a closed-door investor summit Tuesday that the tariff standoff with China is unsustainable and that he expects the situation to de-escalate. Here's the rub. Again, as I keep pointing out, it is not China that is making these videos. Trump is. Trump is. He is backing down because he has to back down. It's not that he wants to. He wants to look tough. He wants to win the trade war. He wants to be the alpha male in the room. It's like, I bested China. I forced them to their knees. Xi Jinping couldn't. No, that's not the case. China was making videos saying, we have been around for 5,000 years and you will fall to your knees before our powerful empire. That's their tape, right? There's like, when, I don't even know who the guy was. I forget the guy, but he was talking to the BBC and the BBC was like, but 15% of your trade is coming from America. He said, we don't care. We don't care. We don't care. We're not stopping. That is what is coming out of China in regards to their videos. What is coming out of Trump is something else. That is called a loss. That is called a man who started a trade war that never needed to take place and failed in that trade war. That's what it is. He can spin it all he wants, whatever he wants to do. He is backing down in this. He is being forced back down by market pressures that is forcing him to back down. What's fascinating about this, yesterday I had on the show, what is his name? From, what is it? I had Brian on the show. And Brian Burletti, that's his name. And Brian's thing was like, he says, look, all of this stuff is playbook. That this stuff has been on some level written down with this notion of this kind of fight for primacy of the globe. He's right about the stuff being written down, by the way. He's not making that up. They're pamphlets, the think tanks, they come up with these ideas about how to maintain global supremacy for the US. And a lot of those ideas is we have to destroy sources of power that is challenging US supremacy, whether that's China, Russia, or Iran. And the Iran deal, the thought is, okay, we're going to pretend to negotiate, but we're going to allow Israel to attack. And in allowing Israel to attack, we can say, oh my God, we didn't know they were going to do that. We were negotiating. With Russia, we lost in this case, but we will come back around to it. We're going to promise that there's not going to be NATO, but eventually we're going to come back around to this. We're going to have this conversation. And the next fight we have, we may actually win. Meaning these are the things that these people be thinking and planning. And as I keep saying, life in this context doesn't matter. When you are thinking about how do you bog the Russians down into its own Vietnam, they're not thinking about how many Afghanistans or Afghans are going to die in that. How many Russians are going to die in that? What is the condition of the territory that you're going to leave as you provoke and drag them into this conflict? None of that is thought about. None of that matters. We need to bog down Russians in its own Vietnam. We need to damage it. That's it. That's all. We can moralize after the fact. We can say, oh my God, look at how many people the Russians have killed in this conflict. You can do that. And you can use morality and ethics as a battering ram to hit people you don't like, ignoring your own rationale and role in that stuff. And so my thing, though, is you never know what that looks like in real life. Let's say for the moment that these trade barriers and this trade war, the entire point of it was to wall off the American market, to not allow what happened to Europe. When Europe decides, well, we're going to go all in. We're going to pass all of these sanctions. We're going to do all of this stuff against the Russians. And you find out, oh my God, the thing that allowed Europe to be a garden was cheap energy. And now that the cheap energy is gone, this is no longer a garden. Yeah, the buildings are pretty, but the people are not necessarily in the best situation, especially the governments. They're broke and everything else. How things look in practice in real life is different than what you write on a piece of paper. Trump, even if he was running a script, had to back down. That's the reality of it. I don't know what is in his mind, so I don't necessarily know what Donald Trump was attempting and trying to do. I have an open mind on this stuff. It's kind of like, you kind of see what happens and see where the person seems to be going in the direction they seem to be going. In this case, he's trying to have a deal with China. Whatever that deal is, he seems to be agitating for a deal with China. He wants to sit down with Xi Jinping. He wants to have the conversation, and they want to come up with something where he can turn around and say, this is a win for America. I'm fantastic. I'm awesome. I'm Donald Trump. Shake Xi Jinping's hand and, walk away. And I suspect he wants to do something similar with Putin. I want to shake his hand. I want to say, this is great. This is the deal for all time. We have economic ties and everything else. The world is great. Will he be able to get those? It's an interesting question. Would Europe allow him to do that? It's an interesting question. Would Zelensky allow him to do that? It's a fascinating question. Will he actually walk away if he doesn't get what he wants? Now, Putin, in his case, has been very diplomatic. And I think Brian Berletic is perfectly right. You need to be that way. Because what you want the public to see is, I don't want this war. I want to end this war. I'm willing to negotiate. I'm willing to have a conversation. I'm willing to do so-and-so. And then you let your man to the side, Medvedev, say some really brutal shit. All of you are going to die screaming in Ukraine. That's Medvedev, right? It's fascinating, the dynamics that are taking place. And we are going to see how all of this stuff unfolds. Malik is right, by the way. Unfinished business for this first 100 days. Trade war with China is still going on. He wants to talk. The war in Ukraine, he's trying to solve, in his words. It's unfinished. It's not solved. Negotiations with Iran. Again, I don't know what is in his mind. Is it in his mind to go with a negotiation knowing full well that he's asking for something that he knows that the Iranians wouldn't give, just to say, well, I tried to negotiate. I did everything that I could. I couldn't get a deal. And because I couldn't get a deal, now we have to do strikes with all of the Zionists that are effectively around him, egging him on in this case of, yeah, let's do strikes. Let's do strikes. Iran's foreign minister, I think it was his foreign minister, had pointed out that there are people around Trump that are egging him on to add more into it in order to kill the negotiations. We saw this on some level when Witkoff came back, went on Sean Hannity and said, well, we are trying to get the nuclear refinement down to 3.6%. Witkoff was immediately attacked for saying that. And the people who were around him, hardcore Zionists, other people that might have been in MAGA, said, well, wait a minute. You were supposed to get rid of the nuclear sites entirely. Netanyahu was like, we're supposed to have the Libyan option. Those sites are supposed to be blown up. They're not supposed to have any nuclear power at all. Okay, well, if that's what you're going with, then no deal. No deal. If it's the first thing that Witkoff said, well, he's sounding a lot like the Iranian foreign minister who came out and said, this is purely about nuclear power, nothing else. We're not talking about missiles. We're not talking about Hezbollah. We're not talking about anything else, just nuclear power and refinement. We are keeping our nuclear thing in order to radiation and some of these other things that we want to do, nuclear power and whatnot. So what is in Trump's mind is one of the most important things in the world in these negotiations, and especially in the Iranian negotiations about whether or not they're going to be strikes. I've been a bit dour on this, but I don't know. I mean, the fact that he's sending Witkoff to all of these negotiations is fascinating. The fact that Rubio has been sidelined in many of these negotiations has been fascinating. Rubio was going to go to London. He's no longer going to London because of Zelensky freaking out, effectively countermanding what Donald Trump wanted in regards to his deal. And so we don't know. We are literally in a wait and see on issue after issue after issue. All of these things were initiated by Donald Trump, except the war in Ukraine. He initiated a peace process, but for the most part, the Iranian stuff, purely Donald Trump. Trade war, purely Donald Trump. All of these things are initiated by Trump. All of these things are unfinished. And by the way, all of these things have the potential to be dramatically bad. If Donald Trump decides to hit Iran, oh my God. If the trade war continues, oh my God. As Benson said, this is unsustainable. It's fascinating. It is fascinating. I wanted to give you guys somewhat of a round the world view on that quote unquote unfinished business, as Malik called out. But I see my man is here. I want to add him to the stage. I really want to have a conversation with him because he was in the Department of Defense. I am eager to hear what Michael Maloof has to say. Michael Maloof, former.
Good morning.
Good morning to you too. How you doing this morning? You doing okay?
Hanging in there for the long haul.
Michael Maloof, he's former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author and a regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service in the U.S. Department of Defense, which is why I wanted to talk to you. Welcome to the show, man. How you doing today?
Thank you. Thank you. Good.
So there are two main topics I want to hit. Hegseth, I might as well get that out the way because that's the quickest to discuss. I was
Wait a
asked.
minute. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I was asked on a show. Oh, by the way, Canadian. Jesus Christ, it dropped out of my mind. Oh, Canadian preppers invited me on.
Canadian what?
So there's a show called Canadian Preppers. I was telling my audience, there's a show called Canadian Preppers. And they invited me on to the show to do an interview. The interview is up. I just wanted to give them a plug. I think it went almost like 2 hours. Shout out to him for the invitation. And thank you for the invitation. I think it was good. So I'm looking for the Hegseth clip because he is not doing himself a service in some of these interviews. In some of them, he seems like he is, I don't want to say on something, but in one clip, the first time this came out, the signal leaks from Walls, he was clearly lying through his teeth in the entire interview. The second clip from the signal leaks, apparently there was a second issue of signal leaks. Apparently he invited family members onto it. And in those leaks, there were, for lack of a better word, war plans. He like copied and pasted into the signal leak, apparently. If I am not mistaken, Politico published those leaks so people could see effectively what they were. Now, the question that people are asking is, should Hegseth be fired for this? When that question was asked to me, I really couldn't answer the question. I don't know. I know John Kiriakou was put in a cage for leaking the fact that we were torturing people, meaning in that occasion, it rose to the level of putting him in a cage. Hegseth is head of the Department of Defense, and they're just asking, should he be fired for this failure? This is Hegseth's explanation, by the way, and I want to get your take on his explanation, because I'm of mind of saying maybe he should be fired. He should have known better if you're going to be the head of the Department of Defense.
That's why I've fought for the budget that the Defense Department requires. And the president has said we'll have our first $1 trillion budget because my kids, my 14-year-old, if he joins, he's going to have a great military. He's going to have peace through strength because of the historic investments of this president. So no, I haven't blinked, and I won't blink because this job is too big and too important for the American people. And I'm grateful for every opportunity the president has given me.
And I was grateful to see the Hegseth Army on the Easter egg roll yesterday in the backdrop. They are ready to go.
That's why I've fought for the budget that the Defense Department requires.
Okay, that's one clip where he's raising the fact that he fought for $1 trillion budget. Here's the next clip where he is talking about effectively, like, if I get this clip right, let's see, where's I just had the clip. I have all of these tablets up. In the other clip, he is making this argument that it really wasn't his fault, that it was people who were effectively trying. Well, okay, this may be it. Here's a few clips from Fox and Friends. All right, let me see if this is the one that I'm looking for.
And get along to go along and, start doing Meet the Press and going to the Council on Foreign Relations and spending time with all the new cocktail sipping crowd. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because President Trump asked me to bring warfighting back to the Pentagon every single day. Right. That is our focus.
Okay. That is not the clip that I was looking for. I'm going to find the clip that I was looking for. I have all of these clips up. He made effectively the argument on Fox and Friends that this is not his fault, that there are a lot of people who are leakers, and it's the leakers who effectively were responsible for putting this out. And he fired those people, and that is why he fired those people, because those people were leakers. This wasn't him. He had nothing to do with it. By the way, one of those leakers showed up on right here. This is the clip. Good. I'm sorry, Michael. This is the clip that I want you to see. So he is not taking any responsibility for this at all. He is blaming effectively everybody else, despite the fact that he is the one that put this in his signal, and the fact that he was using the signal at all is problematic.
Fighters work for the president, and none of this is
Right.
based in reality.
So, Mr. Secretary, I guess I can conclude this. We know some bizarre situation with Michael Waltz happened with the first time the whole thing with the Signal app came out. You believe this came out, they said it was called Team Huddle, because one of the people who work for you, one of the three who no longer are there, leaked this out as a way to get back at you?
That's right, Brian. When you dismiss people who you believe are leaking classified information, and again, the investigation is ongoing and that will take time, and when the evidence produced, it will go to DOJ, why would it surprise anybody, Brian, if those very same people keep leaking to the very same reporters whatever information they think they can have to try to sabotage the agenda of the president or the secretary? So once a leaker, always a leaker, often a leaker.
For one, he does not have the cadence of a Secretary of Defense. I want to say that. He, like the way he communicates is kind of weird, especially if you're thinking about like Lloyd Austin. I forget the one that came before that, but all of them had a very calm, deliberate way of communicating. That is not him. But let's put that to the side. He brought in family members, but he doesn't describe the family members as leakers, if that makes sense. He's describing somebody else as a leaker. Now, maybe the other person is a leaker, fair enough, but he is bringing in family members to war plans that he copied and pasted onto his Signal thing. How does he not know better? I guess is my question. And two, is this a fireable offense? And let's postulate for a moment. Yes, there are people who want to humiliate Donald Trump and they want to embarrass him by getting rid of Hegseth. But does this rise to the level of a fireable offense for the DOD? Should he be dismissed?
Well, you've got a lot of elements here involved here. Number one, Pete Hegseth claims that what was revealed was not classified. Yet, by definition, a leak is the release of an unauthorized leak of classified information. So, was the information classified or not? To be a leaker, you cannot leak unclassified information. You leak classified information by definition. Mm-hmm. Then you're a leaker and you should be investigated. But Hegseth was saying, well, the information contained in the Signal chat was not classified. I don't know if it was classified or not. I have to leave that to the classifiers. But number three, it's strange to me that there's a Signal app, a commercial Signal app on a government phone.
Yeah.
Signal is controlled is a U.S. product. That means the intelligence community has the backdoor keys, and it can be manipulated. It can be, and people can be put on there unbeknownst to the people who initiate the call. Anything, they can wreak havoc, and it's the same old story from the first Trump administration, where you had the intelligence community just out to get Trump and anybody who stood in their way. And we saw that with Mike Flynn. So I share, and John Kiriakou and I have a similar problem. He got jailed, I did not, but we were both whistleblowers in our own way. And but I was forced to testify before Congress under subpoena. I had no choice, or I'd go to jail. These were all investigations, congressional investigations. I knew when that happened, my career was over. I knew it.
Yeah.
It was just a matter of time. But then there were anonymous leaks to the press, and just sharing from my own experience by people who were in the intelligence community. And I even had Seymour Hersh, who has real good contacts in the CIA, come to me and say, well, his contacts say they're really out to get you, Michael.
Wow.
Yeah. And this was in October of 2003. No, 2001.
Yeah.
And 2001, right after 9/11. And at that time, we had open warfare between CIA and Rumsfeld. And and the whole idea was because we were going after terrorists, and the responsibility I had at the direction of the undersecretary at the time was to come up with a game plan on identifying the terrorist groups worldwide, find their choke points, and then work with SOCOM to attack them. I did all that. And we had to do it on a real fast basis. And the agency refused to cooperate with us. Refused. And they told me, look, we're around all the time, but you and your friends will come and go, but we'll always be here.
But what was the CIA's issue?
So my point is, I question whether the information that was allegedly leaked was classified, number one. Number two, I question the fact that a government entity, particularly on national security issues, is even discussed on a commercial app, and it should not be. That tells me it was all a setup. It's created during the Biden administration, I might add. But number three, there are ways in which the principals can communicate on classified issues on government authorized phones that are shielded for national security. Nobody said that this commercial app with commercial encryption is suitable to discuss national security level information.
Right.
And I think there ought to be a general statement that goes out from the White House that app will no longer be used, period, on government business. That needs to be done. That needs to be clarified. So, but I also share, I have mixed reaction to all this. I also share Hegseth's concerns of being undermined. And lastly, because he is the Secretary of Defense, his spouse has a clearance. He has a SCIF in his own house. He has a secure line. He has a SNU-3 in his own house. He has the means to store classified in his own house just by virtue of his position. Wow. His brother, I understand, has a clearance, security clearance, and works at the Defense Department. So there's this press notion that his family members had access to me is a ruse. But you don't know that unless you've worked within the system.
Wait a minute. Why does his wife have a clearance?
Because by virtue of the fact that she's married to him, and she has to go through a certain clearance process. And but you have spouses of CIA people. They have to be cleared.
Well, being cleared is different than having a clearance, or is it?
Well, they have to at least have a secret clearance.
Are you serious? So if I'm married and I am, let's say, in the CIA or something to that effect, my wife maybe go through any clearance saying, okay,
well, he's the Secretary of Defense. Now, when I worked at the Defense Department, I had all the clearances, but my wife did not. No, but I wouldn't discuss anything. But you see, he's the Secretary of Defense. He's authorized to take stuff home. He has stuff stored in his house. And by virtue of talking to people, she has to have a certain amount of a level of clearance just by virtue of the position.
So he could come home and he could.
Now they can come back and dispute that. I don't care, but that used to be the case.
I guess my point is, he can go home and he can tell his wife, hey, we're going to bomb Yemen. We're going to do it on this date. We're going to use these assets to do it. And
I don't know what the content of the of the exchange was. I don't know that it went on such and such a date at such and such a time. I don't know that it said that and that we're going to use these assets. I've never really seen.
Well, I'm just pointing out if indeed she has a clearance that he can tell her anything that he's doing as Secretary of Defense.
No, there's certain things you can't go above a certain level.
Okay.
But there has to be a warm and fuzzy, a national security warm and fuzzy.
I get the sense that they're not going to make that distinction. They're going to say, what the hell is his wife and brother doing on the chat? That they have nothing to do with.
Look at the president of the United States. Look at his wife. What does she do? Yet she can sit in on cabinet meetings and things like that.
I mean, Joe Biden's wife was running cabinet meetings.
Yeah. And I'm certain that national security information was discussed. Who's going to tell the president, no, you can't bring your wife in? No, they're not going to do that. And the Secretary of Defense similarly has given his position and accesses. And the fact that he has this information at home, and it can happen anytime, day or night. People can come on over. He has a Stu 3 in the house.
Mm-hmm.
So,
oh man, I'm dodgy on this one. Because for me, it's
that's why I say that this is not a cut and dry thing.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. This is not cut and dry. But they got to stop using that commercial app of Signal on government phones.
Agreed. He should know better. They should know better.
Well, no, wait a minute. It was authorized by the government. So who authorized it? It had to have been the intelligence community that authorized it.
By the way, why was the CIA going after you? I mean, if your job was I think I know why. But why were they?
Because we were doing their work and we were exposing the fact that they hadn't done the analysis and they didn't have the answers that the secretary needed in near real time. And here I was coming in asking for that information, doing the analysis when it would take them 6 months to a year to do it. And I had to have an answer like day after tomorrow.
I see.
I had Wolfowitz at one point say to me, we're about ready to go to war. We don't know who we're going to be fighting. And we stopped referring to terrorist groups.
Swallow about that. And this is not why I brought you on, but what is that document called? The Afghan Files, if I remember correctly. They point that out in the Afghan Files, that at some point they were like, we have no idea who we're fighting. Like it was they were doing this kind of lessons
and
learned.
We had so many leaks. We had elements within the DIA, CIA against the policy level people because we were going full speed ahead trying to do this. And we had people at DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, not coordinating on packages we were moving up to get action and get sign-offs by the secretary. We finally told them, look, just non-coordinate, but move the package along rather than holding it up because we're on a timeline.
That's what I want to get to. So I had a great guest yesterday, Brian Berletic. And Brian has a view that on some level I think is right, that much of what happens in the world is not disparate things, that there's a coordinated plan at work, whether it's the tariff thing, for example, with the goal being, okay, well, we need to isolate ourselves from China because we're preparing for this kind of pivot to China. We don't necessarily want their market or to be exposed economically in the way that Europe was exposed when Russia gas and everything stopped. Whether it's in regards to the discussions that are taking place now in regards to Ukraine, it's like, okay, we lost, but we'll come back and revisit this NATO thing later, and we will try to go after the Russians again. Whether it's with China and choke points, like it's like, okay, we can't let this horse get out the barn, so we're going to get Panama, we're going to get Greenland, we're going to be able to stop Chinese ships. Like this stuff is policy papers that these guys have effectively written in ways of trying to maintain U.S. dominance and superiority. How much of this is enacted in government? Like when you're in the Department of Defense and you're looking out at these threats to, let's say, the primacy of the United States, the superiority, how much does policy papers written by think tanks, written by, I'll go with think tanks, affect the policy of any particular individual administration? I mean, because honestly, for one, the Iran negotiation, for example, Path to Persia policy document, I can send it to you, has the notion of we should negotiate with Iran, but we should let Israel attack Iran in order to have some level of distance away from it, because our objective is to get rid of Iran. And, you know, as I told you before, I'm very dodgy on a lot of this stuff because I've seen this kind of through line where they've taken down one government after the next throughout the Middle East, with Iran being the last man standing. Wesley Clark said Iran was going to be the last man standing. How much does these policy papers affect actual policy in the Department of Defense?
I think they have an influence, but it really depends upon events that are occurring, because nothing, you cannot just predict the future like that, and everything falls into place as accordingly. They do have influence. They do represent a certain point of view. Mm-hmm. They may even reflect a certain government's point of view, and they may even be partially paid by a certain government, like the Saudis or the Israelis, dependent upon the think tank and the influences. They don't give you a fair and balanced, objective point of view. They're just, let's go. When they have to come to me and ask me to come up with a game plan, when they came to me, I should say, and asked me to come up with a game plan and gave me only a weekend to do it, there was no think tank information available that outlined the way forward.
Yeah,
we were in uncharted waters, and we had to move quickly to respond to an attack that occurred on our soil, and we knew who it was, but we didn't know where they were. We didn't know who they were affiliated with, because none of that analysis had been done, and that's why I was asked, because of my own analytical background, to come in and do that over a weekend, and then team up with SOCOM to once we had identified the choke points, to have SOCOM basically implement a plan to take them out.
But would you agree with me that George Bush used 9/11 as a pretext to enact Project for a New American Century? Like, meaning, yeah,
Did
we
he
have
do what?
Project for a New American Century. It was this document that effectively was like, we're going to reshape the Middle East into this kind of American, American power to change the Middle East. And in the same way, where it's like, okay, well, we're going to go to certain people to do certain things, but there are things that they're doing with the aim of accomplishing a particular objective. Meaning, they would come to you and they say, Michael, we need you to do X, Y, Z. And you do your job. You do X, Y, Z. And somebody else is doing X, Y, Z. And somebody else is doing X, Y, Z. But all of these things are aiming to accomplish a particular objective that has been written out in this kind of neocon policy paper of reshaping the Middle East with American power.
Let me just say that back then, the whole notion at the time of Iraq was to in 2003 was to go after up until a certain point was to look at terrorist groups affiliated with Iraq. But then that shifted to WMD, and immediately we knew that wasn't a good basis, because we had no information, and certainly we had inspectors in and out of that country for some time, since Desert Shield, Desert Storm back in the late 90s, to verify, like Scott Ritter's guys,
right,
go in and look for these things, look for it, and there was nothing available. And I would move a memo up saying, we don't have that kind of evidence. It didn't matter. Everything shifted from the affiliation with terrorism to WMD, and that notion came out of the CIA. They keep blaming the Defense Department for having instigated that notion, but it wasn't. It came out of George, whoever. What was it?
Oh, I know you're talking about. God, what is his name? George Tenet. George Tenet.
Tenet. Yeah.
Yeah.
That came out of Tenet. That came out of Tenet's group. And he and Rumsfeld at the time had a very love-hate relationship, let's put it that way. And it went back to the days when Rumsfeld worked out of the CIA to undertake a government, a congressionally mandated study on the outside threats of missile attacks on the United States. And he would reside there, and he would call in us from the other agencies to give him background, because he wasn't getting that information from Tenet's own people. And every time I'd go and I briefed Rumsfeld about 5 times at CIA, and every time I would finish a briefing, he'd call Tenet and say, "Why can't I get this information from your people?"
Wow.
And that's where, and then they said, "Well, you got it from Maloof." Well, that's why I became the persona non grata, if you will, in their eyes, because they felt that I was undermining their rice bowl.
Yeah, but they weren't giving him the data. They didn't need it.
They were hardly giving him information. They gave him a place to reside, but I don't think he was because everything was so compartmented at that time. They would tell Rumsfeld, who had all the tickets, "Look, this is compartmented. You're not authorized to have it." He says, "I have all the clearances. I have a congressional mandate to do this study, and you're not going to give me the information?" This is what we had to contend with constantly. We had interagency disputes like this constantly. We had a war within our own group.
Yeah.
And how could we effectively fight an outside enemy with that kind of internal opposition?
I guess that's kind of my point, though. Like, they compartmentalize the information almost. I think it's as a
They're
fact.
doing it again. They're doing it again.
George Bush made the choice to attack a country based on weapons of mass destruction, and they compartmentalized information to craft data that was dodgy and use sacrifice Colin Powell at the altar of.
Oh yeah, Colin Powell was set up.
Yeah,
he had George Tenet sitting behind him at the UN the day that he gave that speech about the evidence that they had of WMD, and it was all a ruse.
A ruse to get us into a war, to reshape the Middle East.
And this gets then to the General Clark statements and others, and I was flat out told the same thing, that Baghdad was going to be the hub from which we would then launch regime change to the surrounding countries that were in opposition to Israel at the time.
That's my point, right? Like I think that's Brian's point. That yes,
well, it's true.
That's disturbing. That's very disturbing.
I had it told directly to me. You've heard it from General Clark, and now you got this additional source of information.
John Kiriakou, one time when we were doing an interview, he pointed out, he said he was sitting at a meeting and he was like taking notes for, I forget who was his lead in that meeting. And what is his name? Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney comes on like a screen, and Dick Cheney is like, "All right, we're going to hit Iraq, and we're going to be in Iran in X number of weeks." He said his lead.
But you see, this was the policy emanated very early on, before Wolfowitz came into office, to get regime change against Saddam Hussein, and he worked with Doug Feith. He worked with Richard Pearl, and they were all together in unison with this policy approach of that's why you had the largest embassy in the Middle East was in Baghdad. They built this monstrosity, and it was to be used to fan out and as a hub from which they would then undertake regime change in these other countries. This was a pre-planned thing way before Wolfowitz became the Deputy Secretary of Defense. So they did what they wanted a war, but they needed a basis they could sell to the American people, and when they could not come up with anything, they made something up.
That is disturbing, because
and I saw it personally, and I would write memos. We don't have the evidence to support the WMD argument. We have more on the terrorist relationships, but it was George Tenet's people through their NIE, National Intelligence Estimate, back in August of 2002, all of a sudden talking about WMD. What WMD?
So let's move this conversation slightly to Iran, because what Brian pointed out was there is, and he put it on Twitter so everybody can see it. I think it was called Path to Persia. And it was making an argument for effectively going after Iran and pacifying Iran as a country. And what Brian points out is we are following the exact same playbook. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That's what's happening, because most of the American people are not aware of this background. That's why. So it worked once. Let's try it again. And what's it for? It's all to placate Netanyahu. It's like I've seen this movie before.
Yeah.
And I'm shocked by it. We haven't learned a damn thing.
But does it depend on what? I'm conflicted on this, because from my point of view, no. I agree. Everything you're saying, I think is true. So it's not that part. Does it depend on what is in the president's mind, or is it auto? Like, meaning, if Bush was different, would they have gone with that plan? And if Trump is in this thinking, I don't want this larger war, which is the reason why I'm sending Witkoff, I'm trying to get a deal. Does it depend on the president?
Well, but Trump seems to be more of an independent thinker. Bush was being guided by Cheney. Bush was not the sharpest knife in the drawer, okay?
Right. He sent Witkoff, which is the thing I kind of lean on. Like, you could have sent Rubio. You could have sent Kellogg. You could have sent, like, there are various people you could send that would be a hard line, that would be like, meaning.
But you see, the guys you just mentioned are so jaundiced with their neocon perspective. They've already come in with this. They've already talked about wanting to hit Iran or hit Russia. They come to the table with these preconceived notions without coming in and trying to work out a compromise.
Yeah,
they're not. That's not the. Witkoff seems to, even though he's pro-Israeli, he seems to be saying things that in which they want to talk peace. Yeah. There's something to work out here. I think they can bring in the Russians, and I also think this, and it's very significant to me that Trump is going to be going to Saudi Arabia in a few weeks. But Saudi Arabia has also just sent their foreign minister to Iran, and they're also paying for Syria. And so Trump has seen where Saudi Arabia may be a key, and that fits into what Witkoff is being able to formulate with respect to Iran. So I don't think that and this of course smacks at what Netanyahu wants, I've now heard one report only, not unconfirmed, that he wants to do a limited attack on his own without the U.S. Things don't work out that
I saw that story. That story was weird, because that story said it would only need limited help from the U.S. And
he won't get any U.S. help. But he wants to do it in his own capacity. Well, if you want to have missiles and hypersonics rain down on your land, be my guest.
But that is exactly the document, Path to Persia. We will negotiate, and we will let Israel do an attack where our hands are clean on the attack. And we would say we had nothing to do with it. That was Netanyahu. And we would come in to help Israel if indeed Iran retaliates.
But as I told you the last time, Israel just looks to find somebody else who will do their dirty work. And as I told you the last time we met, this goes back to the time of Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
it's nothing new in the history of the way Israel, the Jews operate. They can always get someone else to do their dirty work. And this is no exception. But now it's really serious because you're talking about the potential for nuclear weapons.
Michael, this has been an illuminating conversation. It really has. I am fascinated by this conversation. Thank you for this. I didn't know this, by the way. I didn't know. I knew you worked in the Department of Defense. I didn't know in what capacity. I didn't know that type of stuff. This has been illuminating. It is terrifying to me because I think it does give evidence to the fact that these policy documents, even if the president, like you said, is not the sharpest tool in the bunch, that he's listening to other people who know this stuff and is guiding them down a particular pathway.
Well, Trump goes by his instincts. He doesn't. Why does he want to create another war when he's trying to solve 2 other wars?
Let me ask you this, and this could be the last question. If Israel does that and attacks Iran, Iran responds. This alienates Trump. If indeed Trump is trying to get an actual deal.
Trump pulls out at that point. He says enough.
You think he pulls out? I'll let you go.
No, I'm fine.
Oh, okay. So Trump, you don't think Trump would respond? You think Trump would actually pull out? Like if Iran retaliates, that Trump would say, all right, you brought it on yourself.
If the Israelis initiated against his will, and he's trying to negotiate a peace settlement and work something out, you see, he has other designs. He may want something in return from the Iranians. And I think he just doesn't go in to do something out of the goodness of his heart. I mean, that's why he worked out a minerals deal, not only with Ukraine, but he's also talking a minerals deal with Russia.
Yeah.
What do I get in return?
Yeah, he's transactional.
Yes,
Michael,
yes, he is.
This is fantastic conversation. Deeply appreciate it. You have no idea. I deeply appreciate this. Fantastic conversation. I love the historical context. It puts things in context in a way. Like, we're not behind the scenes, so we don't see it, right? We don't know the stuff that you know on this stuff. I really appreciate this. Michael Maloof, my man. Michael Maloof, he is a former security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author, regular contributor to many media outlets, and he has nearly 30 years of federal service in the U.S. Department of Defense. Thank you for this, Michael. You be safe.
You too. Take care.
Have a good one. Oh, that was fantastic. God, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Great analysis. Yeah, they like that one. And to another great guest, KJ No. KJ No. How you doing, KJ? You doing okay?
I'm doing well. Happy to be with you.
Oh, man, I always appreciate you. The audience loves you. KJ No, he's a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region, contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon, now available at iacenter.org. You can also find him on, what is the name of the network?
The China Report, that's YouTube, the Breakthrough News Network on YouTube, and the show that I host is called The China Report.
Excellent, excellent. Check him out. They love you on the show, KJ. I love the conversation. You always illuminate me on something. Today is an interesting day. Yesterday, Donald Trump came out, I think it was his 100th day or something to that effect, and effectively said, we are lowering the tariffs. We can't keep them at the level we're going to keep them. We're going to make a deal with China, Xi Jinping. And what's weird about that is I have not been able to find anything that says that Trump has made any kind of phone call to Xi Jinping for them to have this conversation. Benson has come out saying, behind the scenes, these tariffs are unsustainable. We can't keep them up. And we need to effectively stop doing this. Now, this is obviously informing Trump's point of view when he's coming out making this grand statement of, we need to stop doing this. The market's dropping like 1,000 points today. The dollar has been collapsing in regards to value. I think it's dropped like 10%. Everything is more expensive in regards to tariffs, or for that matter, because of the dollar devaluing. And I don't see this happening in China. Like, meaning Xi Jinping didn't make a panicky video saying, well, we're stopping the thing. They've been escalating day after day. We're no longer taking your beef. Maybe we're not going to buy U.S. treasuries. We're no longer taking your movies. Oh, by the way, your grain, we're no longer going to take that either. One thing after the next, effectively saying, we will fight this to the bitter end. If China collapses, then damn it collapses. We are not going to take the backseat to you. And obviously, it's not collapsing. They've gone up, like 4.5% the last quarter. Give me your take on this. I mean, this is effectively the president capitulating because he had to capitulate. The markets didn't allow him, meaning he didn't have the power they thought he had the economic power, the economic might to do what he wanted to do in regards to either China and potentially the rest of the world, because China's been going around having a charm offensive to that rest of the world to try to get them to say you should stand up against the U.S. doing this nonsense. Give me your take on this. What's the thought in China on A, the tariffs in general, but B, Trump's response here in regards to needing to back down?
Well, in China, they're largely ignoring it. They're doing fine. They've largely already, began the process of decoupling since the first Trump administration. And now that Trump came out with this huge threat, they called his bluff. And Trump has had to fold his cards, and they can see that, he has nothing. And as for negotiating with China, no, the Trump administration is negotiating with itself, right? It's talking amongst itself. There's absolutely no evidence that there's been any negotiation with China. So the Trump administration is simply talking to itself, but they have understood, as Bessent has said, that this is unsustainable, that it's Bessent himself said on Reuters that, or according to Reuters, Bessent said, negotiations with Beijing have not yet started. Okay, so Trump is not playing, 4D chess. He's negotiating with himself, and he's destroying the business environment. He's destroying the stock market and the bond market and the value of the dollar. And essentially, he's shown himself up. That he doesn't have the cards. And so for me, when I think of this is a little bit like, perhaps this is an inappropriate analogy, but, when Mike Tyson was young, when he was 7 years old, he was small, skinny, and clearly a very sweet kid. He wore glasses and had a lisp. And if you listen to Mike Tyson now, he still has a little bit of a lisp. But apparently he was really bullied. And at one point, a bully, tried to take his lunch and took his glasses and threw them away. And, he was really humiliated. And 4 years later, at the age of 11, he was fighting adults, professional boxers, bare knuckle, and beating them into the ground. And then he met, Custamato, if you think of as Custamato, Anyway, so, I think there's something that drove Mike Tyson, which was this raging anger, never to be humiliated again. And I think, again, analogies always break down, but I think there's something inside the Chinese spirit which does not want itself to be taken down and humiliated as it has in the past, from the 1800s up to 1949. It was ripped apart by the Western colonial powers. It fought decades of war against the Japanese. 27 million Chinese died. And then as soon as they were liberated, they had to go to war with the United States during the Korean War. 3 million Chinese fought in the Korean War. And at the time, when the U.S. When the war broke out, U.S. was sure that it would just be a walkover. It would be a cakewalk, and that the U.S. troops would be back by Christmas. Well, Christmas came and went. Nothing happened. But what did happen was the Chinese warned the U.S. Do not cross the 38th parallel, and the U.S. did, because they were just going to drive all the way up to the Yalu. The Chinese said, no, you can't do that. And the U.S. national security class, they laughed at it, because China was one of the poorest, literally one of the poorest countries on the planet, and it had just fought, as I said, decades of war with Japan, and also a civil war, 27 million people dead, and they knew that China was incapable of fighting what the U.S. had demonstrated after World War II was the most powerful military machine on the planet. Well, what happened was that the Chinese crossed the Yalu, and they crossed it very discreetly. And the U.S. was constantly monitoring the border, and they said, oh, no way the Chinese can get in here. The daily, surveillance flights. 500,000 Chinese crossed the Yalu into North Korea completely undetected. The US said, maybe there are a few thousand, maybe 10,000, 50,000. They didn't realize that 500,000 Chinese had crossed the Yalu at night, completely camouflaged, and then they hit the US 8th Army first once, and it was just a gentle tap. And then they vanished, and the US said, oh, that's it, that's nothing. We're going to continue advancing north. And then the Chinese hit again. And this was probably the greatest blow to the US military in its history and the longest retreat in its history. And I assure you, the 8th Army still talks about this, with a tremor in its voice. It's been the greatest shock to the US military in its military history. That first tap was like when you're hammering a nail, you tap the nail first, and then the second blow is what drives it in. And the Chinese demonstrated that they're not to be trifled war. After that, General MacArthur said, anybody who wants to fight a land war in Asia has to have their head examined. And I think the same thing applies. Anybody who wants to fight a trade war with China needs to have their head examined.
I cannot think of the general that saved my life, but it's the one that used to, a very iconic pipe. He was fired.
MacArthur, General MacArthur.
Wasn't he fired for that?
Yes, he was fired because he was going rogue and he was, overstepping his mandate. So so he was fired. But yes, he was running the show during the Korean War.
Eisenhower had sense enough to be like, "What the hell are you doing? Stop doing that."
Yeah.
This is the clip when he's talking about China. This is why I thought, and I wasn't sure. There was, let's say, social media reporting that a meeting was scheduled between Trump and Xi Jinping in May. And the way Donald Trump is talking about this, he's talking about it as if there is a meeting, which is maybe is why social media took that mantle. As I said, I wasn't able to confirm it. I wasn't able to find that article anywhere. I'm going to play this for you, and I want to get your take on it. It is, the fact that there's no meeting and he's talking like this is very weird, but I'm going to play it anyway.
Hegseth suggested that with tariff rates as high as they are now, it's effectively an arb trade between the United States and China. Do you see that?
That's true. 145% is very high, and it won't be that high. Not going to be that high. It got up to there. We were talking about fentanyl, where various elements built it up to 145. No, it won't be anywhere near that high.
It'll come down to it, yeah.
It'll come down substantially, but it won't be zero. It used to be zero. We were just destroyed. China was taking us for a ride, and it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. We're going to be very good to China, have a great relationship with President Xi, but they would make billions and billions and billions of dollars a year, and they would build their military out of the United States and what they made. So that won't happen, but they're going to do very well. And I think they're going to be happy. And I think
I have to tell you, I hate this line of logic, the stab in the back myth that let's say certain Americans go with. Oh my God, China is taking advantage of us. They're eating our lunch. They're, it's like they've taken all of our money and they've built up their military. Answer that for me, please. I want you to give your take.
Well, I mean, it's such a lie, but it's so deeply embedded in the national security ideology. You can see that this is the story that they tell themselves, and it's all the story that trickles down into the general public. But essentially, it goes something like this. We helped a poor, impoverished, self-destructive communist China rise out of poverty, out of the goodness of our hearts. And then, like vipers who we warmed against our chest, they betrayed us, they turned on us and they stole their way up, they got everything from us. They stole our IP, our industries, our businesses, our jobs. And they are the reason we suffer, the reason why we're impoverished, the reason why the whole world is suffering. So there's so many layers of deceit and dishonesty and propaganda and ideology embedded in that. But let's break that down just a little bit, okay? First, the US did not help China. Until the 70s, it was actively trying to destroy China, actively, trying to roll China back, multiple wars, a war in Korea, war from Myanmar, war from Taiwan, constant, and then constant internal disruption, trying to, create a guerrilla war in Tibet, and then now later in Xinjiang, etc. The US has constantly been trying to disrupt and destroy and roll back China. From the period of 1979 until the current moment, they sought what looked on the surface to be a kind of modus vivendi, or until 2011, a kind of modus vivendi, but it was also a plan for soft regime change. And if you ask the people, the foreign, the NatSec foreign security types, they will tell you, yes, we were expecting China to collapse and be absorbed. But during that process, as the US was doing trade with China, it was making out like a bandit. I mean, the US was profiting. Now, when I say the US, I mean the US ruling imperial elite was profiting, not the, industrial worker in Ohio. They were getting reamed up the wazoo. But the US ruling elite, they were making out like bandits. And so having made out like bandits and having created tremendous immiseration in their own country and having to deal with it, they're now saying, look, the person who is to blame is China. China did this to you, not us. Let me give you the analogy. Jamal, let's say that you and I have a business and we both do business with each other. You buy some of my things, I buy some of your things. Okay. Essentially, if we do business together, we are exchanging equivalents, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't go into any, negotiation. That's the whole notion of trade, barter, business. We are trying to, as much as possible, as much as the market allows, as much as we exclude, coercive external circumstances, we are trading equivalents. That means that theoretically, I benefit and you benefit, right? Now, the thing is, let's say I benefit and I make money and I send my kids to college and they're all doing well. And then I look at your family, or you look at your family, and all your kids are underfed, malnourished, and nobody's doing well. But somehow Jamal has a new tie and a new hat. And get this, he has a huge gun collection. Okay? What's going on here? Am I to blame for the undernourishment of your children? Did I steal the bread from your children's mouth? Or does it have something to do with the fact that you, Jamal, again, this is an analogy, but you were spending all of that on yourself, and buying expensive cars and yachts and, a huge armory while you were neglecting your own family? Okay? That is the situation that we find ourselves right now. And having done that, the United States wants to see if it can turn the blame and blame China. It's all China's fault. And so then they pick this trade and tariff war. And of course, as I said, you don't pick a trade war with China, just like you don't pick a land war with China. That's a fight you cannot win. And so this is this is one of the ways in which, the lie is just so insidious and dishonest.
That's why I call it stab in the back. It is something. It's almost like, as opposed to saying our oligarchs took advantage and made themselves massively rich.
Yes,
it's China's fault. Mm-hmm. There's a level of racism built into it, and it's also looking at China and say, wait a minute, they're building high-speed rail, they're building their highways, they're building their roadways. Look at their cities. Oh my God, their cities are astonishing. And you look at our cities, and it's like, okay, California has a homeless population that is ungodly. I mean, like hundreds of thousands of people living on the street. That is astonishing. There is no high-speed rail in the United States. If you go on the rail system, you can't even get from one side of the country to the other. The cities are in disrepute. And it's like, clearly, it's China's fault. They've been eating our lunch. Here's another one of Trump. Again, it sounds like he is having some kind of meeting that I am entirely unaware of. I think this is it.
We're talking about the gold.
Okay, right. Saying there's going to be a golden age when we make our deal with China.
I'm not, but 100% of all of these documents are being delivered. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, you said you're ultimately going to make a deal with China, but where do things stand right now? Have you talked to
I
him?
think my relationship, my relationship with President Xi is great. It's been great for a long time. We've had a very good relationship, and I think we'll make a deal with China. If we don't make a deal, we'll set it. We'll just set the number, and I think they'll want to be a part of the United States. We're doing great. This is the golden age, as Paul said. We're talking about the golden age. It will never be a time like this, in my opinion. And China wants to be a part of that too.
I love that. Have you spoken to him? Nah, but we have a great relationship. It's going to be a golden age. They clearly want to be a part of the United States. We have, this is going to be great. If they don't, we'll just set a number. We'll just set a number. That's all.
Let's think about that relationship. And there's an iconic moment that illustrates what that relationship was like. This was in 2017, I think, when Donald Trump invited President Xi Jinping and his wife to Mar-a-Lago. And it was essentially, a state banquet, full reception, all the, cut crystal, and all of that. And then during, after the dinner, it's just, gorgeous, luxurious food, they served dessert, right? And they served this incredible chocolate cake. And as Xi Jinping was eating this chocolate cake, Donald Trump went up to Xi Jinping and said, "We have just launched 59 missiles into Syria, and I want you to know this." And they said that Xi Jinping, stopped eating. Okay, right? And this was a setup, right? This was a message to them. And if you recall, there was the Commerce Secretary at the time. He just bragged. He said that, we showed them. We made him choke on that delicious chocolate cake. And I think that was Wilbur Ross. But it was a message. It was saying that, we are madmen. We can do anything. Even as we're treating you nice, we're capable of incredible violence and cold-blooded murder. I mean, it's almost like a Greek tragedy, feeding, children to your partner or something. So I think that sets the tone of this good relationship. Yes, from Trump's mindset, they had a good meal together. He gave them chocolate cake, but underneath, the poison in that dialogue, that poison in that setup, using the wanton murder of innocent people as dinner entertainment, I think sends a message. And I think it sends the message that, that the US is, it's not simply negotiating from a madman strategy, that there is a deep madness inside its ruling class. And then certainly it is not trustworthy or even agreement capable.
These people are sociopaths. I mean, I did not know that. Wow, I did not know that. And waited till he started eating and said, "Hey, by the way, we just murdered a bunch of people, but all of these missiles we were firing."
Yeah. Over dessert, right? This was
wait for dessert.
This was the after dinner entertainment, right? And to make it even worse, Trump didn't even remember which country had launched the missiles at. He remembers the details of the chocolate cake and how amazing it was. But he said that he launched the missiles into Iraq. So,
oh, he's freezing. He'll be back. Don't worry. He will be back. Oh, there you are, KJ.
Okay. We may have, I think we
Yeah,
I
we
think
lost you just a
there was
little bit. It's
some,
okay. Look,
interference
I
going on. But
literally
anyway,
blinked out.
the missiles
Yeah,
were launched
please.
into Syria. 59 Tomahawks. Yeah. So anyway, 59 Tomahawks were launched into Syria, but Trump didn't even know which country he had launched them into. He said that he had launched them into Iraq. And so when you have that level of stand, when you have that, level of inability to understand world affairs, just even basic geography, that's a very hard situation to do negotiations with. The other thing I'll say about negotiations with it, Trump had stayed negotiations with other countries for 90 days, right? Now, on average, it takes about 18 months to do one of these, tariff trade negotiations. 18 months. So he's going to do trade deals with 180 countries in 85 days. It's not possible. So this is, as we said, I've given this metaphor before, but it's like that chess amateur, who makes that move and then has to take his move back. This is the third move that they're taking back, right? Essentially, they have no moves. They have no strategy. The only strategy, I think, is that somehow they want to, it's in their mind to take down China some way or somehow. And we know that because Scott Bessent tried 3 times to take down China. This is his third time. 1997, when he was working for George Soros under the Quantum Fund, they did this run on Chinese currency, which this was the Asian IMF crisis. They brought down Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, even South Korea. They brought all these countries down, and they were moving on to China. They could not bring China down. They tried to short the currency, and the Chinese outwitted them because they were simply too big. But Scott Bessent tried to do that in 1997. He tried to do it again with his own hedge fund. And now this is his third time. This is third bite at the apple that he thinks that he can bring China down. This time, not simply, with speculation, but with tariffs and the entire apparatus of state. And he's still not able to do that. And you can see that he's tempering his language. He's backing it down. He's saying, we don't want an embargo, because what we have right now is a de facto embargo. And if you have an embargo, who loses? It's the US, which is getting endless goods from China. It's not China. The US market for China is actually not a big deal. And so I think they're starting to understand that they have caught up. The dog has been chasing the truck. Now it's caught up with the truck, and it doesn't know what to do.
This is dog is chasing the car. He doesn't know what to do when to catch it. This is fascinating. He is acting as if there is some kind of meeting with Xi Jinping that is in the future that he's perfectly aware of, and that they're just going to work out hammer out a deal because they have this great relationship. And as you point out, he is angling for that, not the other way around. It's not Xi Jinping beating down his door. That's not a call that's coming to Trump. It's like he's waiting for a phone call that's never going to come.
Yeah, it's like it's like the teenager, who is waiting for the phone call, from her, your crush or something. It's like, why are they not calling me, right?
Yeah.
So
in his mind, it's America. We can do whatever we want. China is obviously going to contact me because obviously they need to, get a deal. And that doesn't seem to be the case. And it's just wild to me. Like, he's having this meeting in the Oval Office and spinning this, or trying to spin it, when Bessent was very clear, like, this is unsustainable. We cannot keep this up. We have to stop this. In which case you get Trump saying, yeah, it's going to go down to something. But he's saying it in the context of a conversation with Xi Jinping that has never taken place, that is not being planned, and that up to this point, social media is just getting it wrong. It's weird. It's very weird. KJ, man, you're fantastic. Thank you for this. I really appreciate your breakdown. I really appreciate your explanation of this. Thank you for pointing out that there is no meeting that is scheduled for May between these two, regardless of what is being put in social media. Xi Jinping, from my understanding, hasn't said anything about it. Less, and definitely not in the sense of we must go and contact Trump because we need to be in the American market. that doesn't seem to be the conversation. Would they, all things being equal, want to be in the American market? Or is, from China's point of view, it's better to decouple? What's
I think they are. I think they're in two minds around it. I mean, if they can continue good relations, they want that. They want win-win relations with everybody. And trade, as I said, can be win-win. We're exchanging equivalents. Both parties can benefit. There's comparative advantage, etc. But if you're working from a flat Earth neo-mercantile theory, where you think that you have to have a trade surplus in order for you to have, national wealth, national strength, all of this stuff, I mean, this is stuff that was undone in the 1700s. Adam Smith wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations, and he was pointing out that this theory of mercantile, national wealth based on trade surpluses and bullion, etc., he was pointing out that that was wrong, that you build the wealth of nations through trade and through specialization and through division of labor. I mean, this is like, this is like hundreds of years old. I mean, this has been well worked out. And so they want to go back to mercantile theories. And the Chinese, as I said, are of two minds. On the one hand, they want win-win relations with everybody, with the United States included. They believe that, the world is big enough for everybody and that, this is mutually beneficial. But if the US has an agenda to undermine, to attack China, to embargo China, to sanction it, and to destroy it, which really is the real agenda, and it's been ongoing since 2011, since the Obama administration. If that is the real agenda, then China is willing to go to the mat, and they're willing to decouple, they're willing to embargo, and they will meet the United States, tit for tat, or more likely asymmetrically. They're aware that we're at this really, really dangerous moment where the empire is realizing that it's really losing its grasp. The center cannot hold, things fall apart, and that they really don't have cards, that the cards they have are bluffing, and that the US could be using this as an escalation to war. And if that's the case, as I said, China is sending the message, let's not go there. We've already had a war during the Korean War. We beat you flat on your back when we had nothing. We were starved, impoverished. Only 1 out of 3 of our troops actually had guns. They were wearing sneakers in the snow, didn't have coats. And we still gave you the biggest defeat that you have ever had in your military history. And they're also saying, so don't go there militarily. And let's also not go there in terms of trade war economically, because once again, this is a war that you cannot win. But they're standing strong, and they're sending a message of resolve and strength. They're not going to be trifled with. It's no longer Mike Tyson, with the glasses and the lisp. It's the grown-up Mike Tyson with Custamato in his back. Yeah.
I don't get the sense that Donald Trump knows anything about
mercantilism.
Mercantilism, thank you. I don't get the sense that he's read Wealth of Nations. I think for him it's dominance.
Yes.
That's the thing that is in his mind. Dominance. I need to dominate. I need to be
strong. He wants people to kiss his ass. That's what he said, right? Yeah. So it's all about dominance. Correct.
Yeah. He just cares about dominance. I want, I'm going to bring Maloney here. She's going to kiss my ass. I'm going to have all of the people around me kiss my ass. I'm going to get countries to bow down to the power of America. And let's be honest, whether you're Obama, whether you're Joe Biden, whether you're Donald Trump, when you take on the mantle of president, you assume a role that in your mind, you're a master of the world. I think that is in their minds. I think it's in all their minds. How they express it may be different. Obama may be more cool. He plays basketball. He croons, right? He seems to get along with the people better. But he's still exerting dominance when he's dealing with other foreign powers and whatnot. Europe just are vassals in that sense. Trump has the mask off, and he doesn't go with the pretense of my friends here or my buddies. It's Neil. And at the point where the country doesn't kneel, okay, now we have a problem. The problem is, though, that you might have been able to get away with this in the 80s. We're in 2025.
Right.
You just lost the war in Ukraine that is still going on right now that you're trying to extricate yourself from. And now you've embroiled yourself into a trade war under the same mindset that got Europe and Joe Biden in that war in Ukraine. And you lost. It's just wild. They don't see the canaries in a coal mine. They don't put it together.
They're not putting it together. And there's also tremendous infighting. Hegseth is in trouble. Clearly there's just incredible. I mean, it's literally a crossfire hurricane that's going on there. But, Trump talks about the art of the deal. But in this situation, he cannot make the deal because he doesn't have the cards. He doesn't have any power. And essentially, the fraudulence of the empire has been shown up. The curtain has fallen. The wizard behind the curtain is just that fat old man, and they can't do anything about it. I mean, you talk about Obama. Obama was a fraud from top to bottom, right? He was a professor at the University of Chicago for, I think, 12 years, 10 years. This was a guy, when he was professor of law at the University of Chicago, did not publish a single thing. Now, how is it possible that you are a professor and you don't publish anything, right? That's like working in a shoe store and never selling a shoe. It's not possible. Okay, something else is happening there. Well, actually, he did publish something. He published his autobiography, right? Dreams of My Father, right? And that was ghostwritten for him by, according to some sources, somebody from one of the members of the Weathermen. But anyway, the guy did not write anything. The guy was a fraud from top to bottom, and you knew he was a fraud the moment he brought Larry Summers onto his council, chief economic, counselor. So it was a fraud from beginning to end. And here we see Donald Trump. There's a kind of refreshing honesty because he just shows himself up for what he is, and that makes the score very clear. But of course, the deep state hates that because they hate his kind of flagrant, blatant, unvarnished demeanor and approach, which they want that dissimulation, that Obama type, slick, salesmanship, and he doesn't have that. It's for him, it's naked power concepts. It's what it's George Kennan. We are going to have to deal with naked power concepts. We'll have to do away with the niceties, and of course they hate that about him. But I think the cards are on the table, and clearly there are no cards. And Trump and Bessent and even Navarro, I think they have to understand that they have to make a deal, and they have to make a deal with China. And along the way, they're going to have to eat quite a bit of crow.
Just to be clear, just one last question. What would that deal be? I'm super curious about what the deal will be. I mean, Trump is saying, well, we're going to have tariffs. China's taking on lunch, blah, blah, blah. But in real terms, in reality-based terms, what deal would Xi Jinping meet? I mean, would this be a deal on trade where we're taking X amount and giving X amount? Like, I guess I'm having difficulty figuring out what that connection would be.
Well, the Chinese demand has been remove the tariffs. And Chinese said, the tariffs are not benefiting you. They're not benefiting us. I mean, they're benefiting China certainly more. But as I said before, when you have $100 product sold in the United States, when Nassim Taleb, $88 of that goes to the United States, $12 goes to China. So if you cut out that trade, China has lost $1, the US has lost $7, possibly more, probably up to $12. It's a losing proposition for the United States. Right now, there's something like 64% of container traffic has been canceled because goods are not shipping, right? And we're going to feel that really soon. We're going to feel it on the shelves. 70% of all the products sold on Amazon come from China. And I assure you, anything that you buy even if it's not directly from China, it has a supply chain that is connected to China. You think of a US car, your average car has 30,000 components. Even if they claim that is made in the United States, about 12,000 of those components were made in China. That is, the most, that's the most conservative estimate. And so it all comes back to the extraordinary manufacturing supply chain that China has built out. So it's in the US interest to make a deal and to see if they can calm the waters and to step back and to eat crow if necessary in order to make a deal.
But just to be clear, the deal would need to be zero tariffs or no tariffs on the products.
That's what the Chinese have asked. That's what the Chinese have demanded. Certainly, they're not going to tolerate having higher tariffs than the rest of the world. Right now, 145% tariffs on Chinese goods and, minimal tariffs on the rest of the world. China has been singled out. That's not going to work. And the rest of the world is actually going to pivot towards China. You already see it in the Southeast Asian nations. Xi Jinping went to Malaysia and Cambodia and Vietnam. What is Vietnam doing right now? They're inviting China to march in the 50th anniversary of the ending of the Vietnam War. This is their, May Day success parade. They've invited the Chinese military to march. This is a first in history. Why? Because actually the Chinese sent 300,000 troops to Vietnam during the Vietnam War. Most people don't know this. And the Chinese sent a message again to the US leadership. They said, if you get involved in a land war with Vietnam, and if you encroach in North Vietnam, we will send, we will fight with Vietnam against you. And because they had that experience of fighting China during the Korean War, the US never invaded North Vietnam, not in any significant way. They bombed Laos, they bombed Cambodia, they tried to destroy the Ho Chi Minh Trail, but they never did a full frontal assault on North Vietnam. And that has to do with their memories of what happened during the Korean War. And so Chinese are sending a message, come to the table, zero tariffs, no discriminatory, tariff, and we'll see if the U.S. will, come and find a way to deal with it, or whether it is committed to decoupling and embargo. If that's the case, remember, China will simply peel off the rest of the world, and the U.S. will have isolated itself. The chance that the U.S. had to do that was the TPP 2015. Trump nixed that right away. The TPP was a plan to isolate China. That Trump nixed that right away, and now he's trying to improvise something without any plans for it. He's leading with his chin, and now he's going to, have a plan and negotiate and etc. later. Your sequencing is all wrong.
KJ No. Which is awesome. KJ No is a journalist, political analyst, writer, teacher, specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia Pacific region, contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. You can get it at iacenter.org. KJ, also let people know where they can find you.
They can find me on the Breakthrough News Network. The show is called The China Report. And just another plug, I also did a show with Manila and Ted on the TMI show.
Did you?
Yes.
Both of them are awesome.
Yes, absolutely. And so we discussed some of these similar topics in detail. So I also recommend people go and check out the TMI show on YouTube.
Yeah, they go from 10 to 12, I believe, immediately after the show. Thank you for this, KJ. Always appreciate you, man. You have a good one.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we have come to the end of the road. We have a super chat. I want to read it out. Super sticker. Dina, oh, you're going to kill me on this. Pantelucas, I think. Pantelucas. I will reach for the stars on that. I think I got it right. Good show today. We had a really good show. KJ is always fantastic. Michael Maloof was great today. And of course, Klarenberg. He was reporting on this notion of the kid that tried to kill supposedly was trying to kill Trump, and the Ukrainian ties that were there that the FBI and the media just completely ignored and dropped, despite the fact that there were telegram conversations with some Ukrainian source, with a Ukrainian number that was advising him and telling him how to do that, even talking about moving to Ukraine. What an idiot. The notion that they were going to somehow extract you from America, abscond you out of the country, across the ocean, across Europe, into Ukraine is outrageous. I don't even know why you believe that. But fair enough, fair enough. All right, I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. Oh, by the way, Canadian Preppers, he invited me on for an interview. I didn't entirely know what to expect. It ended up being a really good interview. He was a great guy. The questions and everything else, we pretty much did a tour of the world. He said, I interview all these people, so he was curious about getting my take on some of this stuff. I think it went well. I think it went well. I haven't checked back on the video. The video, I hope the video does okay. It would suck if it's like you got 2,000 views on a channel with like 1 million people. But we'll see. You all have a fantastic day. And I will see you guys bright and early in the morning. Jamarlt Thomas Morning Show. Signing off. Have a good one, all.